homes because of the busy Memorial Day weekend, but Lake Haven had a lucky opening. The owners were happy to welcome them. The place was clean, the mattress was comfy, and the bed was sturdy. They were careful because there were other guests nearby, but they still tried out the bed's quality. They almost missed breakfast due to a pressing matter when they woke up, but they managed to make it down for a meal with 6 other guests. After chatting with the owners and other visitors about fishing and fun activities on the lake, they headed back to Nanny and Grandpa Clark's house, bringing some homemade cinnamon rolls that the B&B owners had given them for their very good friends, Ethel and Ed. After sharing the cinnamon rolls and freshly brewed coffee, they talked for a bit and then went to the property they already considered theirs. The Clarks said they would come by in an hour to share information about the nearby lake. Joe and Chris explored the shoreline, searching for the best spots for the floating dock, boat ramp, and swimming area. Chris found a few places he liked, but the arrival of the Clarks changed their plans. Chris pointed out where they wanted to place their house and the spots for the boat ramp and floating dock. Ed knew a lot about the lake in front of their ranch, especially the underwater features. He mentioned a shelf near the shore that would be ideal for anchoring the floating dock, a steep area for the boat ramp, and a gentle slope in a cove for swimming, imagining kids playing there in the future. Ed suggested a better spot for the boathouse, considering the best places for the dock and ramp, but agreed that the house location was perfect. It has a 180-degree view of the lake, plus you can see Steel Creek to the north and west. You'll enjoy sunrises from the front porch and sunsets from the back. You'll overlook the swimming area to the southeast, and you can easily go down to the dock to fish or hop in your boat or wave runner. Most importantly, Lake Whitney is meant for flood control, so when the Brazos River floods, it can spread out. This point is high enough that your house won't be affected by flooding, no matter how bad it gets. You can also pull the dock into the cove to keep it safe from strong currents. I really believe this is the best spot for you to build. The more we spend time with you two, the more we are looking forward to talking to your dad next week. The Clarks returned home to prepare lunch. They invited Joe and Chris to join them, but they politely declined, saying they would be leaving for Fort Worth soon. Chris meant well, but as soon as the Clarks were out of sight, Joe pulled out a blanket and spread it on the grass. She smiled mischievously and stood confidently, letting the sun highlight her features. Chris couldn't help but admire Joe's beauty. To him, she seemed flawless, more striking than anyone he had ever seen. He noticed the glow in her hair and her graceful figure. The sight left him momentarily speechless. He admired her from head to toe, taking in her relaxed and carefree posture. Her presence was captivating, and the way she carried herself was full of confidence. Joe turned to glance back at Chris, teasingly, a playful grin on her face. She knew she had his attention. Chris quickly joined her on the blanket, the playful atmosphere between them bringing a sense of closeness. They embraced warmly, their connection clear in every movement. Without needing words, they shared a tender and intimate moment, simply enjoying being close to one another. Their affection was evident as they spent time together, wrapped in the comfort of their companionship. The sun continued to shine down, but for them, time seemed to stand still in their quiet, shared moment. They both smiled, happy to be in each other's presence, savoring the simplicity of being together. They lay there, still connected, breathing heavily and feeling tired. Finally, Chris rolled off and lay next to her on his back. "Wow," he said softly. "That's a new experience for me. How do you do things like that?" She stayed quiet for a moment, then gathered her strength to rest her head on his broad chest. Once comfortable, she replied, "I'm not sure what you mean. I just respond to you, my strong one." But something about that position felt amazing, and the feelings were overwhelming. I can't explain it, but it was wonderful. With a laugh, she said, "But now I need to get into the lake to wash away everything because I feel so full." They put on their sandals, held hands, and walked down the path to the swimming area. The water felt cool but nice. He helped her wash off while she helped him, and then she playfully moved closer to him, teasingly saying, "I want you to hold me again. Can you do that for me, my strong one?" He could, and they enjoyed their time together until she began to lean forward into the shallow water. He held her by the waist, and they shared another moment of joy. Feeling content, he picked her up, carried her to the blanket, and dried her off with a towel from the truck. Sleepily, she put on her sundress while he carried her and her things to the truck. The blankets needed washing, so he placed them on the floorboard. As he drove, he thought about the changes he noticed in his girlfriend. Maybe she was just becoming more confident in herself and her feelings. He had been her first love, and she seemed to really enjoy their special moments. He couldn't deny that he had opened up some feelings and desires in her. The question he faced was not whether she really felt a strong connection to him, but if her feelings would stay strong over time. Just the thought made him feel a little uneasy. Joe rested on his shoulder until they reached Chisholm Trail Parkway. She woke up suddenly with a small gasp, and he held her closer, asking if she had a bad dream. "I did. I was with my mother and she was telling me I had to take a job we didn't want so we could live because Elwood kicked us out again and she couldn't find work. She took me to a truck stop and told me to gather $500 by morning or not return to the motel, then drove away. I noticed rough-looking men staring at me and I felt hopeless. 'How can you love someone like me?' she said sadly, looking straight ahead. 'I'm worthless, raised in a bad place. I may be smarter than my mother, but since I came from her, I'm no better. I think that's why men try to take advantage of me. They know I'm worthless.' Chris was silent for a moment, while Joe kept staring ahead. Finally, he spoke. 'I love you because you are as pure as fresh snow. I love you because you are smart and strong and you know right from wrong. You can't control where you came from, but you can control who you decide to be. It's silly to think others see you as worthless. They did the same to Kate, and she comes from a rich family. No, Joe, they see your beauty and want to have it, even if just for a moment. Your beauty is both a gift and a challenge, but it's your kind heart that is your true strength, and it's your mind that makes you special. We can't choose our family, but we can choose our friends and partners. Your biological family might be troubled, but you are part of a new family that loves and respects you. You have 2 sisters, a mother and father, and someone who loves you. They all see you as a treasure. Your past is behind you. You are creating a bright future, and your children will never experience the hardships you faced. One day, the bad memories will fade away, replaced by happy ones. Until then, share your worries with me, or with your sisters, Donna and Diane, or your other mom, Deborah, or your other dad, Dan. We are here for you during both the good times and the bad." Joe wrapped her arm around him, leaned closer, and softly said, "I know you're right. It's just hard sometimes. Thank you for loving me. You are my strength." "Loving you is the easiest job I've ever had, Joe." Tuesday arrived. Joe was in class while Chris was at work. At noon, he checked his phone and saw a message from his lawyer. He called back right away and learned Joe's mom wanted to meet with him. That took him by surprise because he had spent last night planning a meeting with her for later this week. He asked his lawyer to arrange it as soon as possible, ideally after 3 p.m. on the first available day. He said he would come at any time, even if it meant skipping work. An hour later, he received the message. The meeting was set for 4 p.m. today. The Red Brick Tarrant County Jail holds about 5,000 inmates, including many women waiting for their trials. Gail Montgomery was facing serious charges and couldn't pay the high bail, which meant she would stay in jail until her trial in September and probably even longer. The last time he saw her, Joe's mother had unkempt hair, wore dirty, oversized clothes, and had wild eyes. She looked nothing like her daughter. Today, dressed in an orange jumpsuit and with her hair clean and brushed, her appearance was very different. Without the wildness, her eyes were almost as green as Joe's. Her nose was straight, and she had similar high cheekbones. However, her discolored teeth and the deep lines around her eyes and mouth made her look older. Though she was in her 50s, she didn't even look 40 yet. A life of struggles had made her seem much older. She sat quietly, allowing him to look at her until she spoke softly. "I'm Gail Montgomery, Joe Kennedy's mother. I know who you are, Christian Alexander, and that you've been caring for her since I pushed her away. I wanted to meet with you to say I'm sorry for what I did to you, and for all the trouble I know I caused. It must have been hard for you to take in someone like Joe after everything I put her through. I understand she must carry scars from her past, and I know my selfishness caused this. I also want to thank you for getting involved with the district attorney's office to help me enter a counseling and recovery program. I won't really know if it has changed my life until I'm out and can make my own choices again, but I feel clearer than I have since I left home at 16. I've reached step 9 of the program. I've made a list of people I've wronged, and I'm reaching out to them one by one to apologize and ask for forgiveness. Chris, can you forgive me? Chris looked at her in surprise. Who is this person? He thought. The stories Joe shared and his limited experience with her didn't prepare him for this moment of open honesty. When he didn't respond right away, she continued, I know this is a lot to ask, but if you can ever... But Chris interrupted. Miss Montgomery, I'm sorry you caught me off guard. To answer your question, yes, I forgive you for what happened at my apartment. I don't know of any other wrongs against me, and if there are any, I forgive those too. You're right. Jo has her own battles to face, but she is brave, smart, calm, and honest. You must have done many things right in raising her. Shaking her head with tears in her eyes, she responded, No, I didn't do anything good. I was a bad example. If anything, she took care of me. I struggled with addiction. I couldn't take care of myself or my daughter, though I loved her in my own way. I know she is angry with me now, and she has every reason to be. She is at the top of the list of people I have hurt, but I won't reach out to her because we shouldn't if it would cause them more pain. She sighed and firmly said, I have already hurt her enough in this life. One more thing, Chris. I have accepted the plea deal as proposed. Thank you for helping to drop the attempted murder charge, but I know I need to face the consequences of my actions, and prison is just a small part of it. Never seeing my daughter again is much harder to bear. The plea deal requires me to spend 7 years in prison. During that time, I must continue with a rehabilitation program. Finish my education. I dropped out at 16 and learn a skill. Maybe by the time I get out, I will be able to manage my life better and become a useful member of society. That is what people say should be my goal. Given all the mistakes I've made, it's hard to see myself as anything different. Maybe if I succeed, I will have the chance to ask my daughter to forgive me for all that I put her through. When I was using, I didn't face reality, didn't take care of her, and didn't deal with anything. Now, clear-headed, I see how much I struggled and how I let my daughter down. I used to blame my mother for being a bad parent, but I have made much bigger mistakes than she ever did. Can I call you Gail? Chris asked. She nodded. He continued, Even with your mistakes, you have a very successful daughter, Gail. She had a 4.0 grade point average last semester and will finish the first summer session with 2 more A's. Yes, you made mistakes, but don't think for a moment that your mistakes ruined your child. She is a talented young woman. Now, what if I told you that seeing you like this, sober, thoughtful, with plans for the future and sorry for what you did would help her? He noticed the doubt on her face and went on. You will only be 43 years old when you get out of prison. You both still have a lot of life ahead of you. In my opinion, knowing you are taking charge of your life, facing the challenges, and realizing the mistakes of your past is exactly what your daughter needs. She loves and feels hurt by you. She cares for you as her mother, but struggles with how you've changed. Seeing you now will help her, even more than it has helped me sort out my feelings towards you. Chris drove home with many thoughts in his mind. He didn't plan to see Jo tonight. She and Kate were supposed to study for a big exam in a tough psychology class. When he arrived at his house, he noticed the Jeep parked in the garage. As he went to the kitchen door, he heard voices. After unlocking the door and stepping inside, he paused for a moment and recognized who was there. He walked into the dining room, where Jo liked to study at the big oak table under the bright chandelier. Jo sat across from Kate, and they were quizzing each other from their notes. They wore bright outfits, their legs tucked comfortably underneath them. What a surprise! I didn't expect to see you both when I got home, he said with a smile. Jo jumped up and hugged him tightly like a little kid and gave him a warm kiss. Kate smiled and laughed at Jo's enthusiasm before answering. The dorm was filled with football players who just finished high school and were planning a party on the 4th floor. We figured we wouldn't get any studying done with that noise, so we came here. You don't mind, do you? Do I mind coming home to find 2 lovely girls in colorful outfits at my table? Not at all. But it raises 2 questions. Jo, did you show Kate around and have you 2 eaten? Kate replied, We spent the first hour exploring. "This is the most amazing house I've ever seen. Joe showed me the before pictures, and I can't believe how different it looks." Joe added, "And no, we haven't eaten and we are really hungry. What are you going to make for us while we study?" "I have some fresh ground beef and homemade buns from the butcher, romaine lettuce, the first ripe tomatoes from our garden, and chips. I'll make burgers if you two help with the toppings and cleanup." "Deal," they replied happily. After they enjoyed their burgers, Kate said excitedly, "Joe, I think we should do all our studying here. This beautiful house, a great cook, and the best burgers ever. I could do this every night." "You're welcome any time. I even have extra bedrooms if you want to stay over for the night," Chris offered. "I make a pretty good breakfast too, and I grind my Costa Rican coffee beans at H-E-B." "Joe, that sounds amazing," Kate said to her roommate, who had moved from her chair to sit next to Chris. "But it looks like you're not really focused on studying now. So much for your perfect grades." Joe smiled, gave Chris a quick peck on the cheek, and told Kate to help her tidy up so they could get back to their studies. 2 hours later, Chris closed his laptop and went to take a shower. The girls were still studying hard when he finished, so he said goodnight and went to bed. He lay on his back dreaming about a beautiful blonde and a stunning brunette when he felt a little hand on him. His heart raced, and he instinctively grabbed her and moved with her. She managed to keep quiet until she suddenly let out a loud sound of joy. She would later regret that moment, because Kate never let her forget it and could repeat it word for word in the most awkward situations. They all left after a breakfast of biscuits and sausage gravy with grits, fresh orange juice, and lots of coffee ready for class. Only Joe came back that evening. She was tired but happy about the test, which both she and Kate had passed with flying colors. Chris made a goulash with ground beef, calabaza squash, and tomatoes, topped it with cheese, and served it with chips and guacamole. Joe had skipped lunch, so she ate more than her fair share. After dinner, they reviewed the test questions and her answers. Chris became serious. "Joe, I visited your mother yesterday. I was going to have my lawyer reach out to her, but she contacted him and asked to see me." Strange coincidence, right? Anyway, I went, and I was surprised. She was wearing a prison uniform, but she looked much better than she did before. More importantly, she was sober and apologized to me. She's in a 12-step program there, and she's already at step 9. That's when people start making amends with those they've hurt. You might wonder why she reached out to me and not you. The program doesn't let her contact anyone if it could cause them more pain. She knows how much she hurt you, and she feels that seeing her even to apologize could hurt you again. Joe bit her lip, and her disbelief was clear on her face. She was sober. Yes, the program is for helping with drug and alcohol issues. It's possible she could find things to use in jail or later in prison, but she's really trying to get better, and she said she hasn't used anything since she was locked up. She is also getting help, working towards her GED, and learning a skill to support herself when she is released. She agreed to a plea deal that will keep her in prison for 7 years, followed by 5 years of supervised release. She will be just 43 when she gets out, even if she serves the full time, which is unlikely. Joe took a deep breath and shared her doubt. When she was sober, she really convinced me. She said she would stop and change her ways. But within an hour, she was drinking again or using drugs. Maybe she will get clean in prison and stay that way, but I won't believe it until I see it. I get that. Would you like to see her? Maybe hear what she wants to say? If you think it's a good idea, I can go with you or not, depending on what you prefer. I don't know her like you do, but I've seen how convincing she can be. Let me think about it overnight. We can talk more tomorrow, Joe said without committing. 2 days later they met, with Chris waiting outside a small room. Joe was distant and cool, while her mother was emotional, admitting to many times she had let her daughter down. Sober, she felt terrible for not protecting her young daughter from Elwood and his sons, especially for suggesting she accept their behavior to help herself. She explained that they used the Find My Phone app on her old iPhone to locate her in Fort Worth, but she insisted Elwood only wanted to talk to her about coming home. However, by the time they reached Dallas, they had started using drugs and changed their plans. When they got to the apartment, she was so under the influence and they were so persuasive that she began to go along with them. She apologized for how Joe had been treated and for not defending her daughter. She promised that the first time she heard about their plan to sell her was when Elton mentioned it to stop Elwood from being rough with her. She apologized for not being aware and for not trying to intervene when she could. Jo slowly started to warm up, accepting her mother's apologies and feelings as genuine. She wasn't sure if the desire to change would last, but she decided to keep visiting while her mother was in Fort Worth. They agreed to meet again in a week. On the way home, Jo was quiet during dinner and in their room. The next morning, though, she seemed back to her usual self. "I've thought it over. I'm not expecting her to succeed, so I won't be hurt again if she doesn't. But I want to support her by meeting with her. Maybe if she knows what I'm doing and hears about you, your family, and our life, it will encourage her to keep trying." That afternoon, Jo was so excited she almost knocked Chris over when he walked in. "You won't believe what happened. Donna got into TCU. They've already paid her deposit. She's coming to school here this fall. That's just 2 months away. I'm so excited." Chris raised an eyebrow. "So that's why I got a strange text saying my family is flying in tomorrow and wants to stay at our house. The message mentioned big news but didn't say what it was. You got a call and they told you everything. I guess I see where I fit in the family. Don't be jealous, honey. She's my sister too, and I talk to her every day." "What? You don't even talk to me every day." "You grown-ups don't use social media like us young people. If you did, I'd message you every day too," she joked. "It sounds like you young folks have too much time on your hands. I'm too busy for that TikTok stuff, especially next month when I have graduate classes added to my schedule." "That doesn't worry me for the 6 weeks I'm with you, but it does scare me for the fall semester," Jo said. "We will need social media, our phones, and a lot of video calls to manage being apart that long." Jo used his truck to pick up the Alexanders from the airport and bring them home. He used her Jeep to go to work. Trey called him around 1:30 and asked where he was. "At work, of course. Why do you need something?" "No, but you need to get home. Your family is here." Jo picked them up at 10:30 and she told me they took her out to eat. She's taking care of them while I work on this project. "Chris, as good as you are, this project can be finished next year without you hovering over it. You won't accomplish much more today. Take the rest of the day off and go be with your family. That's an order." He slipped out, hoping no one saw him, feeling guilty all the while. That guilt vanished as soon as he received their warm hugs. When he complained about his girlfriend being the one to tell him his sister was coming to school here, he received playful sympathy. "Poor baby, so mistreated," his mother said, patting his shoulder. Diane poked her lip out and said, "Wah, wah," pretending to cry. Jo and his dad just laughed, but Donna helped him feel better when she gave him a big hug and said, "I wanted to tell you in person so I could see your reaction. I'm upset with Jo for saying something. Now you're mad at me instead of being happy I'm coming close." Chris looked at his dad and then back at Donna. "About that, I start a 1-year graduate program in architectural engineering in July. It's at Colorado University in Boulder, so I won't be living here until next July." The sad look on her face touched his heart, so he hurried to add, "I'll be back every holiday, starting on Labor Day. I'll be wherever you, Jo, and our family are for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I'll probably stay until January 5th. I'm going to take some time off for spring break to visit you all during the 3-day Easter break, and again after my exams. Then I'll start the first summer session and I'll be done. It won't be long at all. It feels like the time has gone by quickly since I graduated from UT. "What do you mean by take time off? Why would you need to take time off from school?" she asked, raising an eyebrow but still holding on to him. "Part of my deal with CU is that I'll earn credits for being the assistant project manager for a building that Beck Construction is building in Boulder. Beck will keep paying me, and they are also funding my grad school. I will miss being here with you all, but this chance is too good to pass up. And I promised Jo a travel card from American Airlines so she can visit me whenever she can. I can get you one too if you'd like." "We already promised her one to come home. If she uses it to come see you, that's fine too," his dad added. Donna turned to Jo and asked, "Have you asked him yet?" "No, I was waiting for you and Kate so we could ask him together. Kate is on her way over if you want to wait, or we can ask him now." "Let's wait. We need all the help we can get." "What?" he began to ask, but his mother took his arm and said, "Show us what you have completed since we were here a month ago." Kate walked in just as they were leaving the dining area. Jo told her, "Come on, we're giving the Alexanders a tour." The biggest changes were outside, but Joe wanted to show them the furniture she picked for the other 3 bedrooms and what Chris chose for the loft and bedroom on the top floor. As they looked at the guest bedrooms on the second floor, Chris noticed for the first time that each room had more of a feminine touch than he remembered. Kate especially liked one room, calling it her dream bedroom, even better than my room at home. She hugged Joe and praised her for doing such a great job. Donna loved the second bedroom, full of her favorite pink. She exclaimed it was perfect and gave Joe a hug as well. His mother was thrilled with the larger third guest room, which had a queen-size bed. Diane admired the loft and said it was the most beautiful room she had ever seen. They all headed downstairs, eager to see the garden, the newly planted lawn, the updated garage, and the work on the barn that Joe was excited to share about. However, when they reached the bottom of the stairs, Chris said, "Stop! I may have been born at night, but not last night. Someone has been tricking me, haven't they?" "Who has been in on this plan from the start?" The 4 women put on innocent faces, but Chris's dad, standing beside him, gave them a serious look and said, "So that's why I didn't need to make a dorm deposit, Donna." The 3 girls and his mother linked arms, looking determined. Finally, Joe spoke up. "Chris, I can't stand being in that dorm another day, and neither can Kate. The football players are always bothering us, trying to get us to go out, even when we are studying. This big old house would be empty while you're gone, with animals trying to get in. But if we were here, we could take care of everything for you." Kate added, "I'll be happy to pay rent, Chris. This is so much better than the dorm, and my parents love the idea, so they will pay whatever you want." Donna joined in, "And we promise we won't have any wild parties or break anything." Chris stepped closer and pointed at Donna, saying, "I just saw you looking sad about me leaving, like it was a surprise. You can't expect me to believe your promise after that." Donna looked hurt, and then their mom spoke up. "Chris, this isn't some kind of trick. They really will take care of your lovely old home. It's just for a year, and you'll be back often enough to check on them anyway." "Oh, I won't need to come back," Chris said. "The security company is coming tomorrow to put alarms and cameras all around the house, and I can check everything from my laptop or phone, even from Colorado." "You girls still want to stay here?" he asked. They shared looks and nodded. Joe said, "That makes it even better. Our main worry was safety, but we were going to get some protection if needed. Having alarms and cameras now adds extra security." Kate smiled. "So will there be cameras in every room?" Donna looked worried. "Not in the bedrooms and bathrooms, right, Chris?" "I didn't expect anyone to be here, so I asked them to secure the place. I don't know where the cameras will go. They probably will cover most rooms. What, are you planning to have visitors?" "No," Donna said. "We don't want you watching us, especially your sister." Chris grinned at them. Joe looked serious, but Kate seemed amused by the idea. "Chris, you aren't really going to put cameras in the bedrooms and bathrooms, are you? Even in Donna's and Kate's rooms?" Joe asked, clearly upset. "I'll keep the bedroom cameras off unless I see boys sneaking around. Don't worry, they're small so you won't even notice them, unless you bring someone into my room." Kate began to giggle and then burst out laughing. She walked over to Chris, touched his arm, winked, and said, "I'm not shy. You can watch me anytime you want, big guy." Joe hurried over, playfully hit Kate on the arm, and shot her a look. She then turned to Chris with a worried expression, only to see him about to burst into laughter. When she looked back at Kate, she noticed Kate was also trying hard not to laugh. "That's not funny, you two," Joe exclaimed. But it was. Soon, everyone in the room was laughing at Joe's expense. She pouted for a moment, then playfully hit Chris on the chest and joined in the laughter. Once things settled down, she turned to Kate and said, "Your invitation is off. I know how you like to run around in hardly anything." Kate pulled Joe into a hug, still chuckling, and said, "I couldn't help it. The look on your face when you thought about Chris watching us was just too funny, feeling a little jealous." "Yes, I am. I know you like showing off too well," Joe replied jokingly. Kate hugged her tighter in response. Once Kate let her go, Joe turned to Chris and teased, "I kind of like the idea of having a camera in our room. We won't have to video chat so much, and I'll have my hands free." Chris blushed, and Donna exclaimed, "Joe!" while their parents laughed again. Kate, standing behind Joe and out of sight, winked at Chris and silently agreed. The tour of the grounds, garden, and outbuildings was less intense but still received positive comments. "We'll keep the garden looking nice and take care of the lawn and bushes, Chris," his sister said confidently. "You know I have a green thumb." As it was getting late, they decided to eat out that night and grill on Saturday night. Deborah suggested inviting the Becks over for a big gathering. Chris was uncertain at first, but knowing it was his last chance for a year to see everyone, he agreed. He had to be there the next day for the security installation, and he wanted to try out the new smoker that one of the welders made for him. He thought it would be fun to invite all his bosses and their wives. A few more briskets wouldn't hurt. He sent out the invites. 3 of his bosses already had plans, but Trey, Jim Bob, and Bob Elliott, along with their wives, would be coming. After their meal, they headed to the store to buy supplies. They picked up 4 briskets and 6 rings of sausage and added vegetables for the grill corn still in the husks, large zucchini, bacon-wrapped asparagus, and stuffed jalapenos. They loaded their groceries and a few cases of beer in the truck bed while their mom kept the wine and mixers in the front with her. Chris woke up early to start fires in the fire pit. He planned to add more logs throughout the day to keep the coals going in both the pit and the smoker. He would add the sausage and vegetables in about 7 hours, 1 hour before the brisket had to be wrapped in butcher paper and set aside in a cool ice chest. He might be from Tennessee, where barbecue was different, but he had lived in Texas long enough to learn the local way. Now he wanted to perfect his skills and impress his bosses. Chris came back in and helped his dad make breakfast for the women. Then he woke them up by knocking on their doors and calling, "Breakfast is ready." They came down the stairs in colorful robes and slippers, rubbing sleep from their eyes and pushing their messy hair back. After breakfast, Chris insisted they all go shopping to avoid being in the way of the security installation. They thought he wanted to hide where the cameras were placed, but he said Joe needed new summer clothes for Colorado and Texas. He handed Joe a credit card, but Deborah took it and handed it back to Chris. "It's my treat," she said firmly. Chris looked at his dad, who smiled and nodded. So he shrugged and told Joe, "Buy what you want since Mom is paying." Chris and Dad moved coals, put the briskets on the grill, soaked the corn so the husks wouldn't burn, sliced the zucchini, wrapped the vegetables, and put them in the fridge. Then they grabbed a couple of old wooden chairs and moved them to the shade by the grill. They cracked open a cold drink and chatted. The security company arrived, checked in with Chris, showed him and Dad the plans, got their approval, and started working. When they finished 4 hours later, Chris and Dad agreed you really couldn't see the cameras. Chris started his laptop and they checked the feeds. The video and sound were clear. An hour later, the women came back with the Jeep filled with shopping bags. They carried the bags into their rooms. The men had another drink and checked on the brisket before returning to their conversation. At 4:30, Deborah came out in a new sundress and told them to clean up and get dressed so they would look nice when the guests arrived. "We're cooking," Chris called back. "Besides, I said informal, which means shorts and t-shirts, not dress clothes." They watched her come closer with her hands on her hips and a sharp comment ready before bursting into laughter. They got up, hugged her, and Dan said, "Yes, dear." Chris added, "Okay, Mommy dearest." She playfully pinched him, then hugged them tightly and giggled as she led them back. "If the briskets burn, I'm blaming you," Chris joked. Their clothes were laid out on their beds, and they were told to shave, shower, and put on the new outfits. "Yes, dear. Yes, Mommy dearest." The guests arrived at 6, after the hot Texas sun had lowered in the sky. The men were dressed casually for the informal party, wearing shorts, polo shirts, and sandals, while the women looked vibrant and colorful, like a summer fashion show. Tables and chairs were set up under the shade of big live oak trees near the grill. A cooler full of beer sat on the ground next to where the men gathered. Bottles of wine and mixers were on a side table, with another cooler filled with ice beside it. A different cooler held soft drinks for the younger guests. Everyone greeted each other, chatted briefly, and then all except Chris headed off on a tour of the house, guided by Joe, with Dan helping to explain the structure. Chris took the briskets, wrapped them up, and placed them in the cooler. He grabbed bags of vegetables and sausages from the refrigerator and carried them to the grill. After arranging everything on the grill, he went back inside to answer questions and, hopefully, receive compliments. He received plenty of both. The men looked at before photos of the renovations and asked about specific details, curious about how the work was done with minimal damage to the original wood and plaster. The women, however, were not as interested in that, but enjoyed sharing their admiration for the impressive transformation of each room. The men joined Chris outside by the grill for another beer, while the women remained inside, admiring everything. After about 40 minutes, Dan called for them, saying the food was ready. The laughter and chatter of the women echoed through the house before they appeared. "Everyone looks great," Bob said with a smile, and the other men agreed. The brisket was delicious and received high praise. Chris quietly thanked Aaron Franklin for his audiobook on barbecuing. There's a lot of science behind cooking Texas-style BBQ, but Chris had also experimented, creating a special rub and a sweet yet spicy sauce that made it stand out. He was excited that people were comparing it to some of the best BBQ in Texas, which is a big deal around there. The vegetables and sausages were also enjoyed, but the brisket was the main attraction. This made him feel as proud of his cooking as he did about renovating the house. As Father's Day approached, the reality of moving in a year hit him hard. Knowing he had to relocate in 15 days, he rushed to finish the remaining tasks at home and work, but not in his relationship with Jo. She was busy with her projects and studying for exams, and mostly stayed in the dormitory during the week, only coming to visit him on weekends. They made the most of their last weekend together, enjoying each other's company, but he missed her throughout the week. She finished her exams on the 28th, and they spent Saturday and Sunday preparing for the trip during the day and enjoying special moments together at night. Chris bought a cover for the pickup bed to protect the things he was taking, but they kept their clothes on the back seat. They started their 800-mile trip at 5 a.m. on Monday to avoid the morning traffic around Fort Worth. Their route took them through the countryside, along 81 to 287, passing through towns he had never heard of, such as Iowa Park, Wichita Falls, Childress, Clarendon, and Claude, before reaching Amarillo. They had lunch and then took US 87 through Texline and the northeast corner of New Mexico, where the flat plains turned into mountains as they joined IH-25 at Raton Pass. They could have continued driving, but it was still a long way, so they decided to stop at a Holiday Inn on top of Raton Pass. It was a traditional two-story hotel with several sections, a central area, a pool, and a cafe, all covered by a dome. They ate in the small cafe under the dome and watched the Rockies on TV with several truck drivers who seemed more interested in Jo than the game. She looked nice in her yellow dress and white sandals. Jo knew she looked good and didn't mind showing it off a little. Her movements caught the attention of those around her, who enjoyed watching her. Chris jokingly called her out on it, but she said she was just giving them something to think about during the quiet night. "Are you always such a flirt when I'm not around?" he asked, as they walked away from the cafe with many eyes on them. "No, I'm only bold when you're here. Kate and Donna have been teaching me, but I was too shy to try it before now. Their tips really worked. They couldn't take their eyes off me. Sweetheart, they would have looked at you even if you were sitting quietly. You're stunning." She smiled, then excitedly said, "Let's go swimming," as they passed the pool. "It says it's heated. You just want to show off in a swimsuit, don't you? What if they all come over and distract me?" "I'm not worried they aren't like that. If they were, you'd have already been surrounded." They went swimming. She wore a bright blue swimsuit, and people in the cafe shifted to get a better view. More people appeared on the second-floor balcony overlooking the pool, while others took seats nearby. Seeing so many onlookers felt like too much for her, so she quickly got out, put on her cover-up, and rushed him along to their room. "I don't think I can handle that," she said when they were safely behind a locked door. It was enjoyable at first, but then I started feeling guilty about teasing them, and I got a bit scared because there were so many people staring at me getting closer. "I think I'll just stick to flirting with my boyfriend." Chris began playing Simply Irresistible by Robert Palmer on his phone. He turned to her and said, "Then show me your moves, you little show-off." He took off his swimsuit and lay down on the bed, resting his head on his elbow. She grinned playfully and accepted his challenge. Wearing just a cover-up and bikini, there wasn't much to take off, so she took her time, having fun and teasing him. When Simply Irresistible ended, the phone switched to Thunderstruck by AC/DC, and she moved in rhythm to the music. When she was done, he laughed and said, "Well, you'll never be bored. You could always perform for a crowd. I can only imagine how much attention you'd get." A moment later, he was comfortably lying back, and she playfully showed off her dance moves. "What do you think about turning the rest of the loft into a bar and putting in a shiny pole in the middle?" he casually asked the next morning during breakfast. She almost spit out her oatmeal, surprising herself and her pretty sundress, catching the attention of anyone nearby. With her bare feet on his dashboard and her dress resting in her lap, she flirted with him and teased the truck drivers on the road from Trinidad to Pueblo to Denver, until he turned toward Boulder. "I wish I had a CB radio in here," he said. "I'd love to hear what the truckers are saying about the girl in the Ram truck. I bet they're surprised by what they see now." Their two-bedroom apartment in a small complex between the campus and his work site was better than they expected. It was even nicer than the pictures online. It reminded him of the apartment in Fort Worth, but here he had a corner unit on the second floor that faced the beautiful Rockies. Still, it didn't feel quite like home. CU was a lovely campus in a stunning setting, and the work site was close enough that he could bike or walk when the weather was nice. With just the truck between them, they decided to buy mountain bikes to explore the town and the trails, along with basic hiking and camping gear for trips into the nearby mountains. He didn't start work or school until July 5th, so they had the rest of Tuesday and all of Wednesday to shop for gear and explore before Independence Day. They picked up brochures from the Chamber of Commerce office, searched online for things to do around Boulder, and made a list of all the things they wanted to do before Joe went back to Fort Worth in 7 weeks. Their list was quite long. Getting the mountain bikes and hiking camping gear was easy. There were plenty of shops around. The challenge was deciding where to go the next day. They finally decided to take a quick trip to Rocky Mountain National Park. Joe was too tired to change her clothes that night, but she was not too tired to dance for Chris. He was enjoying the chance to let her take the lead. With both hands free, he could help her in ways that were harder when he was in control, and she really liked that. The only issue was that he could playfully tap her on the backside while still being attentive to her, which caused her to react happily. He thought it might be interesting to see if the noise they made would be heard by their neighbors. The manager did not come to check, but the young couple living next door quickly stepped outside to introduce themselves when Chris and Joe came out the next morning. When they mentioned their plan to visit Rocky Mountain National Park, the couple suggested following Trail Ridge Road all the way to the Alpine Ridge Trail. They warned that the park was very busy and that visitors might be turned away if it was too crowded. Robert and Claire were so friendly and helpful that while they went to get a map of the park, Joe quietly asked Chris if they could join them. He shrugged and said, "Whatever you want works for me." When they returned with the map, Joe asked if they could ride along, but the couple had other plans for that day. They invited Chris and Joe to come over for dinner and a chat later that evening. Joe said yes on their behalf. They were fortunate. The number of visitors for the July 4th holiday was lower than expected, so they got into the park without any trouble. The map was useful, as cell phone service was unreliable after Estes Park. Joe helped Chris navigate, letting him know about interesting sights ahead. They spotted plenty of elk in Estes Park and in the wild areas beyond. At one point, a large group of elk crossed the road on a mountain slope, and everyone stopped to watch. They also saw a moose in a pond, a mountain lion, some bears, and even a majestic American bald eagle. The best part of their trip was the Alpine Ridge Trail. The first half-mile was a steep walk before the trail flattened out as they neared the top. They were young and fit, but the thin air at an elevation of 12,000 feet made breathing a little tough. From a distance, the landscape looked empty, but tiny plants, including flowers, thrived there. It was amazing to think about how they survived in such a challenging place. The views from the top were unlike anything they had ever seen before. The hikers talked quietly, almost as if they were in a sacred place. They were higher up on the mountains than ever before, and it felt right to honor the silence around them, broken only by the chilly winds. They stayed on the mountain, hugging each other and gazing at the distant peaks in wonder. They stuck to the paths so they wouldn't harm the delicate tundra plants, but bent down to look more closely and appreciate their beauty. Reluctant to leave, they felt drawn back by time and the hunger for the sandwiches, fruit, and drinks they had brought. Instead of heading back to the picnic area they had seen on the way up, they stopped at a lookout on the opposite side of the road to eat. With a sandwich in one hand and a soda between his legs, he looked out at the view and said, "I love the Great Smoky Mountains. I have walked over 100 miles on the Adirondack Trail. I enjoyed the forests and the views of the green valleys, but I've never seen a place like this. I feel like I'm coming back to a place I've never been before." Joe replied, "How do you think I feel coming from a small town? I'd seen pictures, but they don't show how vast it is or what it feels like with the wind, sun, and silence. It's like being in a whole new world." The trip back down to Estes Park was amazing. They saw stunning views, groups of deer and elk, and clear, icy streams, but somehow it felt less exciting. They promised to return to walk the trail again and to explore Grand Lake, where there were many trails to discover. They knew it would take many trips to see all the wonderful spots marked on the map. Their new neighbors, Claire and Rob Clay, had brought 4 pizzas from a local Italian restaurant kept warm in the oven. There was a fresh salad, and drinks included locally brewed beer, Colorado wine, or spirits from a nearby distillery. "Are you guys from Colorado?" Chris asked, noticing their love for local products. "Actually, we moved here from Chicago and are in our second year of grad school at CU. We've really fallen for Colorado. Can you believe how 2 kids from the city feel about this beautiful state?" "We had our first taste of the Rockies today on our way to the trail you suggested, and we get it," Chris said. "I'm from Franklin, Tennessee, near Nashville, and Joe is from the Hot Springs area of Arkansas. We have never seen anything like today." When Joe chose ginger ale to drink, it started a friendly exchange about their lives. They were surprised to learn Joe was younger and single. "We thought you were our age and married." This led to her sharing that she graduated early, carpooled with Chris to Fort Worth, and became good friends with him before they started dating. She also mentioned her enrollment at TCU. Chris talked about why he was in Boulder and shared about his job. This gave Joe a chance to show them pictures of his house in Fort Worth. Claire and Rob admired the place, and then Chris asked them about their graduate schools. Rob studied computer science, and Claire was a certified teacher looking to get a counseling license. Joe was excited to hear that since she had similar plans. They spent the next hour discussing their goals while the guys relaxed and chatted. When they said goodbye close to midnight, they made plans to work out together and explore downtown Denver the next day. They also planned to go to Ralphie's Independence Day event at Folsom Stadium on Thursday evening after they hiked in the morning. Joe jokingly warned Chris to take it easy during their workout because Claire teased her about being too loud the night before. Chris laughed and said Rob mentioned it was entertaining. Joe pretended to be embarrassed, but her smile showed she was ready to have some fun tonight. At the gym, Joe noticed it was bigger than the one at their apartment in Fort Worth. "In winter, Chris," Rob laughed, "you'll see that many indoor gyms are bigger here because winters can be intense." Rob and Chris spotted each other while working out. Joe watched as Chris lifted weights, amazed by his strength. Meanwhile, the girls rode bikes and ran on treadmills, chatting and laughing. They only went quiet when Chris walked by, taking a break. Claire whispered to Joe, "Wow, how do you handle him? He looks so strong." Joe replied, still watching Chris, "He says we fit perfectly together. I can handle him most of the time, even when he lets me take charge." "Yeah, I can believe that. He's really something." "I might need a little break," Joe said, getting off the treadmill. She then walked over to Chris, hugging him from behind. She quietly suggested a nicer way to relax, and they returned to their room. 3 hours later, they met up again, dressed and ready to enjoy 16th Street in Denver. They explored like tourists, visiting art galleries, museums, and historic homes. Joe thought Chris's was nicer. They also shopped and sipped coffee in the quaint cafes along 16th. They spotted an ad for an escape room and managed to solve the puzzle to escape from an Egyptian-themed room just in time. It was for beginners, but they felt proud of their accomplishment. On the 4th of July, Chris made breakfast for everyone. Afterward, they took Rob's Range Rover to the Flatirons. It was an easy 2-mile hike filled with interesting facts about local plants and animals. Next, they tackled Sugarloaf. This hike was tougher and longer, but the view from the top was breathtaking, showing some of the tallest mountains in Colorado to the west. It was an amazing sight, although not quite like Alpine Ridge. They enjoyed a picnic at the summit, cleaned up their area, and made their way back down. At the parking lot, Chris asked about the Switzerland Trail starting there, and someone mentioned they were reserving it for mountain biking. They changed outfits again and hopped on the free bus to the stadium for Ralphie's Blast. Local bands played one after another, and some were quite good. Joe and Claire entertained the crowd with their dancing in their white shorts and matching CU Buffalo shirts, which Claire had lovingly named. The crowd was so packed that they had to dance in place, but they weren't alone in their fun. No one around seemed to enjoy themselves more than they did. Their cheerful movements attracted cheers and applause, which encouraged them even more. This was the new Joe that Chris had noticed over the past few weeks. Joyful, confident, and openly expressive. He had seen her grow as she moved past her hard times, taking on new experiences and overcoming fears. The shy and occasionally rebellious girl he met had changed. Now she wore eye-catching outfits and showed a bright smile, playfully teasing without worrying too much about how she came across. It was a wonderful change, fitting for her vibrant spirit. Still, Chris wondered if she was aware of this new side of herself, and if she would handle it well when he wasn't around. The fireworks display was dazzling, and they joined the crowd in cheering and clapping. As they looked up at another round of fireworks, Chris wished they were watching from their apartment balcony to see how big and bright the colors were. It was hard to tell how grand they were from where they stood. Joe snuggled closer and whispered that the fireworks she had planned for later would be even more impressive. When the show ended, many in the crowd shouted for more. But Joe and Chris hurried back to their apartment, excited for what was to come. They said goodbye to their friends and rushed inside. Joe felt the thrill of the crowd, the music, dancing, and being close to someone while enjoying the fireworks had built her anticipation. "Don't hold back. I want you with me now," she urged. Chris focused on making her feel good in other ways. He took his time to explore her body, which made her feel different emotions. Despite her teasing, she soon found joy in his attention, letting out soft cries of pleasure. As she calmed down, he continued to tease her gently until she pulled on his hair and insisted, "Enough! I want you with me now." He chuckled at her eagerness as he moved closer to her, stopping briefly to tease her. She expressed her need again, urging him to be with her. He listened and joined her, bringing her joy for a while before she wanted something different. "I want you to be with me passionately. I want to feel how much you want me," she exclaimed. And so he did, and she matched his energy. Afterward, she held him close and said, "Now, show me how much you care. I want to share my love with you." There were no fireworks this time, but over the next 20 minutes, they felt a deep connection that was special. Wrapped in his arms, Joe felt closer to him than she had ever felt with anyone. Chris lay with her, wondering how he would manage when she wasn't there. He loved the way she felt, her scent, her soft voice, and even her peaceful sleep. He couldn't imagine being without her. Friday morning was filled with work at the Graduate School of Engineering. He spent time completing necessary paperwork and attending back-to-back classes from 9 to 11. Joe walked around the campus alone until his classes were over, and then they had lunch together at a nearby sandwich shop. Afterward, she dropped him off at work and then went shopping with Claire. The Clays were taking them to their favorite camping spot in Rocky Mountain National Park, a site only for tents at the base of Long's Peak. They planned to climb Long's Peak one day and visit Eugenia Mine and Storms Pass another day. They needed more gear for camping, hiking, food, and water. Chris was well known among his co-workers. 5 had worked with him at Hot Springs, and 2 had just come over from a renovation project at TCU. They cheered and joked with him as a welcome, and one asked if his girlfriend was going to visit him. He reminded them she was a TCU student and laughed off her visiting him in Colorado. As soon as he had a moment, he texted Joe to tell her and Claire to come by his work site, as some of her fans were hoping to see her. Claire agreed, and they wore the tank tops and shorts they had bought earlier, paired with hiking boots and socks. They arrived at 4:40, parked the truck, and walked across the lot to where Chris was discussing plans for the next week with the project manager and about 20 workers. The rest were organizing tools and equipment. Chris had his back to the parking area, but he noticed the girls had arrived when he saw his audience look away and the others turn toward that direction. A cheerful southern voice called out, "Is Chris Alexander here?" Some of the men pointed to him, and one guy from the stadium project grinned at Chris. "Look who it is!" Chris turned to see Joe and Claire standing confidently and acted surprised. "Hey, ladies! I didn't expect to see you here. What's going on?" "Oh, we wanted to be here when you finished work so we could start our camping trip. We didn't see you among all these strong men, so we wanted to check if you were still here. Are you ready to go now? If not, we can wait." Joe stood with good posture, hands on her hips. Claire, however, stood a bit differently, showing off her playful side. While Joe's expression was sweet as she asked her question, Claire's looked a bit cheeky. Chris glanced at the project manager, who nodded and said, "Go ahead. We're not going to get anything else done today." He turned to the group and said loudly, "That's all for today. Just remember, we're waiting for the equipment and teams to arrive late Monday. So enjoy your long weekend, and we'll start again early Tuesday." Chris walked over to the two ladies beside him. They put an arm around him, and he did the same as they walked toward the truck. "Hey, boss! Call me if you need help. It looks like you have a lot on your plate." The girls walked playfully, and Chris called back, "Nah, I'm good." Their friends cheered and whistled until they got into the truck and drove away, the girls waving from the windows. The guys were still chatting excitedly when Chris turned the corner. "Thank you, ladies. You did a great job. I hope Rob won't mind, Claire." "Not at all. He loves it when I showcase my talents. When I tell him about today, his only issue will be that he wasn't here." "Well, you're great at that. Being the center of attention, I mean. You two sparked a lot of thoughts for those guys. Some are single and some have families far away. That will keep them thinking tonight." "You mean thinking about tonight, right?" Claire asked with a quick laugh. "That too," Chris replied with a chuckle. Joe turned and looked at Claire. "Thinking about, do you mean?" "Yes, dear," she said. "Thinking about means daydreaming, so if you sense someone thinking about you tonight, you'll know why." Everything was ready, so they picked up Rob and headed to the campsite. Expecting a busy campground, they were surprised to find only half of the sites filled. Long's Peak Campground had a bathroom and space for 26 tents, nestled among rocks and trees. They chose Campsite 4, which had 2 large trees, a table, a fire ring, and easy access to the restroom. The tents were set up side by side, with a solar shower hanging so it drained on the grass behind them. Sleeping mats were placed inside the tents and covered with sleeping bags. They had sandwiches with chips for dinner, and everyone, including Joe, enjoyed one of the craft beers that Rob brought. The drinks flowed, and they shared stories and laughter, entertaining Rob with their tales of fun at Chris's workplace. Claire was right. Rob's only complaint was missing out on the experience. The night went on, and the mood relaxed. They did their best to keep the fun to themselves, but they noticed smiles and friendly glances from the other campers the next morning anyway. The parking lot, which had been nearly empty when they went to bed, was now full of hikers heading to Long's Peak in both large and small groups. As they enjoyed their breakfast sandwiches, the temperature was 46 degrees. The weather forecast said it would rise into the 70s by noon, so they dressed in hiking boots, shorts, t-shirts, and light jackets. The climb to the top of Long's Peak, one of the 14 ERs, mountains over 14,000 feet, was too challenging for inexperienced hikers like themselves. They walked about 6 miles to the boulder field, but decided to skip the final tough climb of 5 miles to the summit. It was a tempting idea, but they didn't have the right gear and knew that less than half of those who attempt the climb succeed. They felt that they had come far enough. For lunch, they enjoyed granola bars and drank water while taking in the beautiful views. Afterward, they returned to their camp. They were allowed to have small fires in designated areas, but Chris had brought a charcoal grill for the tailgate, which they used to cook sausages. The delicious smell drew the attention of their nearby campers, a couple of friendly young pairs who asked if Chris could cook some hot dogs they had as well. By the time the sausages and hot dogs were ready, they had made new friends, Jose, Rosa, Todd, and Terry. They were students from the University of California, San Diego. They were exploring 4 national parks before heading back for their senior year. Rocky Mountain National Park was their second stop. They had started with the Grand Canyon. After visiting Rocky Mountain, they planned to go to Yellowstone to meet more friends, spend a week there, and then visit Grand Teton National Park for another week. After that, They would return to San Diego. The group spread out a couple of large blankets to sit on near the fire. Chris made a small fire with wood he had brought along, though it was more for atmosphere than warmth. As the evening grew chilly, everyone wrapped up in jackets and blankets. Chris was sitting down with Joe leaning back against him. They chose to stick with water, but after the meal, Jose opened a half-gallon of sangria for the others. The drinks lightened the mood, and as hours passed, the conversations turned more personal. Joe didn't need a drink to join in the talks. She loved engaging with people. Chris, on the other hand, was quieter, listening and responding when included. After a couple of hours, the topic turned to personal relationships, and Joe asked how long the couples had been together. Terry casually mentioned that all four of them were in open relationships, and that their friends heading to Yellowstone shared the same lifestyle. Claire and Rob acted like it was no big deal, but Joe seemed taken aback. Chris wrapped his arms around her to offer comfort, yet he said nothing. Joe listened as they explained that they planned to go their separate ways after graduation, so they thought it was fine to enjoy time together and with others who felt the same while they were still in school. Rosa mentioned that after she finished school, she wanted to find someone and settle down. Meanwhile, Terry, Todd, and Jose said they did not plan to settle down until they turned 30. Claire and Rob did not add anything to the conversation. Joe was quiet for a moment, but finally spoke up. "Do you mean you switch partners? How does that work?" Terry and Rosa smiled, with Rosa explaining, "Yes, we do switch partners sometimes, but there are times we focus on one person. For example, if it were Jose, Terry and I would spend the night with him. If it were Terry, all three of us would try to make her happy. Terry and I like both men and women, but the guys don't, so what we do depends on who it is." Joe's eyes grew wide, and she simply replied, "Oh," before the conversation turned to other topics. Not long after, Joe told Chris that she was getting cold and wanted to go to bed. They excused themselves, leaving the others to chat and drink, even though that was not allowed in the park. Luckily, their tent was a good distance from the group, so they were not disturbed by the noise. "How can they do that?" Joe asked quietly, but with annoyance. "I could never let someone touch you like that, and I know you would feel the same about me." Chris thought for a moment. "We are in a serious relationship, they are not. Some couples choose to explore their own paths, but I won't be part of that. Just like you said, I'd be angry if someone touched you without your consent, and if you invited it, I would rethink our relationship. I try not to judge. I have friends with all sorts of views and lifestyles. I have seen some unusual practices, but that's their choice. They have to live with who they are." Joe moved closer, and they cuddled together. "The people who want more than one partner must not be getting what they need from their main partner. I can't imagine wanting anyone else after being with you." With that said, they shared an intimate moment together, feeling happy and relaxed. After a while, the others decided to head to their tents too. The next morning, 6 people were feeling a bit rough. 2 of them were up early, making breakfast on Rob's propane stove. They warmed up some cooked sausage and placed a basket of croissants on the table. Then Joe went to wake the others. Chris smiled as she eagerly watched for Claire and Rob to come out of their tent. She felt relieved when they finally appeared. The first hour of their long hike to Eugenia Mine, Storm Pass, and maybe Estes Cone was quiet. The 6 of them were working off the effects of too much sangria. Joe and Chris led the way, chatting and walking quickly while the others lagged behind. Visiting the old mine and drinking more water helped improve their energy, and they felt more awake for the next hour. The trail wound through a rocky forest, but In Creek brought various wildlife to see. They caught nice views of Long's Peak and other tall mountains as they walked. The scenery offered even more when they reached Storm Pass. At the pass, they enjoyed fresh apples and cheese while drinking water before setting off toward Estes Cone. It was a short but tough hike with steep paths and loose rocks that gained 1,800 feet in altitude. They moved slowly and carefully, trying to avoid any slips or twists at such a high elevation. When they reached the summit, the view was stunning, showing a wide landscape, and they spotted herds of elk grazing on Battle Mountain to the west. The way back was easier since they were mostly going downhill, but they learned quickly to be cautious and avoid slipping, which made the return take almost as long. By the time they got back to the campground, it was full, and the parking lot was crowded too. Many other campsites were available along the trails, and those tackling the more challenging hikes often set up camp along the way. They built another fire, letting it burn down to coals. Chris wrapped thin steaks, onions, and potatoes in foil and placed them on the coals, which cooked quickly. Since it was their last night, Chris offered beer in red Solo cups, but everyone decided on the new gallon of sangria Jose had brought. Chris insisted they use his cups and put the bottle away, knowing the Rangers would check the campground soon. Jo grimaced after her first sip and mixed in some water. She sipped slowly, and Chris suggested adding ginger ale, which she accepted instead of the sangria. Everyone thanked Chris as the Rangers passed through while they enjoyed their second cups. After a long day, it was getting cooler, but they wanted to clean up before bed. The solar-heated water was chilly now, so Chris warmed some up. They took it into the tent, gave each other a quick wash, and shared a towel to dry off. Chris began to put on his sleeping shirt and shorts, but a smiling Jo playfully pulled him closer. There were no loud moments tonight. They shared a tender time together and then fell asleep in each other's arms. Jo didn't get to check on sleeping arrangements the next morning because she slept in. Claire went into the tent to wake her up for breakfast and came out with wide eyes and giggles. She quietly told the cook, "Wow, she looks even better without her pajamas on. If you ever want to see two girls together, let me know. I'm not interested in girls, but for her, I might make an exception." They ate quickly, took down their tents, loaded their gear in the truck, and said goodbye to the other campers. It was only 43 miles to the campus, and they left at 7:40, but they were in such a rush that they had to drop Chris off at the campus before going to the apartments. After class, he walked back. They had meatloaf with the Clays for lunch and then took a nap. Feeling refreshed, they went to the workout room to stretch and ease the soreness from their hikes. That night, they enjoyed some TV time while holding each other, and then they shared another intimate moment. From that point on, they settled into a routine. Breakfast at 7:30, class from 9 to 11, work from noon to 6, dinner, some fun activity, and then bedtime by 10:30. Jo grew restless, so she signed up for an online writing course that would count for English credit at TCU. This filled her mornings, but not her afternoons. Chris encouraged her to practice her martial arts, so she joined a dojo that taught Krav Maga. There, she improved her skills and learned new techniques. He invited her to the workout room each Friday to show off her progress. She suggested he come to the dojo after work on Fridays to see what she was learning. After 2 weeks, he went along and was very impressed. She may be small, but her skill and strength were impressive. On weekends, they enjoyed activities from their list, starting with a Colorado Rockies game at Coors Field in Denver. That was the last trip they took with the Clays, who had family visiting for the remaining summer. The following weekend, they traveled to Golden, visited the Coors Brewery, explored the historic downtown area, and checked out the Railroad Museum. The next day, they were amazed at the Buffalo Bill Memorial and Museum and learned a lot at the Golden History Center. The highlights for the rest of their summer included a trip to Black Hawk and Central City. Jo couldn't go into the casinos, so they explored the historical sites of the old mining town that had become a gambling hotspot. Aspen and Vail were nice but costly. The hot springs near Steamboat were enjoyable, but they truly loved historic Leadville, especially the Opera House. Most of their activities were popular with tourists and sometimes crowded, yet they cherished their time together, discovering new places and trying new things for the first time. Before they knew it, it was mid-August, and they experienced what it meant for saying goodbye to feel bittersweet. Jo left with the credit card that Chris had gotten for her, promising he would visit for Labor Day in 2 weeks. They promised to meet for holidays and other chances to be together. Jo returned to school just after Chris finished his summer classes. She enjoyed her courses, which were more challenging and made her think deeply. Though it was only her second full semester, she had enough advanced placement credits from high school to be considered a second-semester sophomore, allowing her to take tougher classes. She, Donna, and Kate went over, laughed about, and signed the agreement Chris had sent Jo. It laid out what they promised when they asked to stay in his house. He included a note that there would be audio and video recordings on the property, and they needed to acknowledge that they knew about it. Chris arrived at DFW on a flight late Friday night for Labor Day weekend. The three girls picked him up in the Jeep, but Jo had to share her time with him more than she wished during the 3-day visit. Still, she enjoyed being alone with him at night, and during the necessary afternoon naps she insisted he take. They had a barbecue, visited the Fort Worth Zoo, ran along the trails by the West Fork of the Trinity River, and danced at Billy's Bob's after a meal at Joe T. Garcia's. Although none of them drank alcohol, they had a wonderful time dancing and meeting new people. Chris felt responsible for the safety of the three girls, so he stayed alert, but nothing concerning happened. He left on Monday night, leaving 3 tearful girls and himself with tears in his eyes. It would be a long wait until Thanksgiving before he could spend time with them again, and being apart from Jo for that long would be tough. At Chris's urging, Jo found a martial arts school between her classes and home where she could continue training. Donna and Kate were curious, so they decided to join her. After seeing the introductory class and hearing the sales pitch, they signed up too. Jo quickly moved up from the intermediate group to advanced, so Kate and Donna did not see her much at the school. Both displayed natural skill and enthusiasm for martial arts, and they learned quickly. They weren't as skilled as Jo, but they were improving and felt ready to handle most situations they might face. Chris went to class, worked hard, studied, and exercised 3 days each week, but he wanted more. After checking out a few places, he joined the dojo his girlfriend recommended and started training in Krav Maga. His earlier training in boxing and karate was helpful for self-defense, and he encouraged Jo to learn Krav Maga because it's a strong form of martial arts. He thought someone like Jo, with her size and qualities, should be able to protect herself from anyone who might pose a threat. Though he believed he could manage in a fight, he understood from the past year that sometimes you can be outnumbered and need to act quickly to handle the situation. Krav Maga taught him how to do that, turning martial arts into his evening routine on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. Sticking to this daily schedule required discipline, a fit body, and a sharp mind. It was tough at the start, but as the weeks went by, it became his normal. He felt stronger and knew Jo would be surprised to see him again at Thanksgiving. He hadn't lost weight, but his waist was now a size smaller. They used video calls to connect at least once a week and shared time talking for about an hour on Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. Their classes were tough, and Chris's workload was heavy. With winter approaching, he knew work interruptions would soon come, so they seized every moment of daylight together. The other interns from the engineering school were learning what it's really like on a job site compared to the classroom. They admired Chris for his knowledge, skills, and the respect he earned. News of his abilities reached the professors and the dean, who were pleased about the arrangements made with Beck Construction because of Chris. They faced chilly Canadian winds starting in late September, but the first major winter storm arrived from the north in the last week of October. With warnings for severe weather ahead, the university canceled classes, and the project manager sent everyone home on the 31st with instructions not to return until the storm passed, which could take 5 or 6 days. Chris and 3 others from Fort Worth managed to get on one of the last flights that night, landing in DFW at 11 o'clock. Roberto's wife drove the group in a minivan, dropping Al and Willie off on the way before taking Chris home. After that, she headed back to their house near Bend Brook. When Chris arrived, he noticed the Jeep was gone and the house was dark. He remembered that the girls were going to a Halloween party at a fraternity near campus. Donna and Kate had been seeing some guys, but they weren't dating the same ones. Jo was focused on her studies, but eventually agreed to join them at the costume party as superheroes from the Avengers. Jo dressed as Carol Danvers, Kate as Hellcat, and Donna as Storm. Earlier in the week, they had shown their costumes to Chris over FaceTime. He knew their outfits were fitting, but still modest. He felt a bit uneasy about them being at a party where things might get wild, so he chose to wait up for them. When 1 o'clock arrived, he called Jo, but it went to voicemail. He tried calling Donna and then Kate, but he got the same result. Growing worried, he decided to request a ride share. The app said it would take 30 minutes. 20 minutes later, Chris was walking through the backyard to meet the Uber driver at the gate. Suddenly, he saw headlights on the road. The vehicle stopped, and the gate opened. Chris realized it wasn't his ride. He hid behind a tree and watched as another vehicle pulled up next to his Jeep. The vehicle sped down the small road and came to a stop in front of the house. He didn't recognize who was driving, but he knew it wasn't Joe. She drove more cautiously. Chris cautiously approached, staying hidden in the shadows behind the barn. He felt uneasy about what was happening, sensing it wasn't going well. The doors of the Jeep opened, and 5 boys spilled out, laughing loudly. One of them staggered over to a plastic pink flamingo placed near the parking area and did something silly. Then, the front passenger of the Jeep reached back and pulled out a blonde girl who didn't seem awake. She lay limply in his arms. Chris moved closer, but remained unseen. Next, the doors of a BMW SUV swung open, and the inside lights lit up. Chris saw 2 boys sitting in the front, and 2 girls resting on the boys in the back. He guessed the blonde was Donna, and the brunette was Kate. The boys got out and dragged the girls out, letting them fall onto the ground before calling for help. They grabbed the girls' arms and lifted them, struggling to carry them towards the house. Kate lost her shiny athletic shoe, but no one picked it up. He noticed that the boys who went ahead didn't turn off the security system, so he guessed he would get a call soon. He silenced his phone, and moments later it vibrated in his hand. He was hiding in the bushes near the front porch, so he quietly told the caller that there were 9 boys inside, all young men, and there were 3 girls who seemed to be unconscious. He thought the girls were in serious danger. He listened as the security service called for help, but they said it would take about 10 minutes because their cars were busy with another situation nearby. They were sending help from farther away. Chris told his contact they also needed medical help for the girls. He knew that waiting could lead to bad outcomes for the girls. Their unconscious state worried him. It suggested they might have been given something harmful. He was sure they wouldn't end up like this on their own. Another sign was that the boys seemed more aggressive than worried, which meant he might have to confront all 9. He realized they were drunk, and if they separated, he might handle them one by one. However, he would have to act fast to prevent them from alerting each other. Even if they were drunk, 9 strong boys would be a challenge, and failure could be dangerous for the girls. Chris quietly returned to the barn, took out his concealed firearm, and grabbed 2 magazines for it. He loaded one magazine and tucked the other into his jeans. He also picked up a sturdy club made from a pool cue that had been modified for better grip. He put on tight leather gloves, secured the club to his wrist, took the firearm in his right hand, and moved back towards the house. Unsure of where everyone was inside, he paused behind a post on the porch and accessed the camera feed. Only Kate was in the living room. She was lying on the couch while 2 boys were beside her. He quickly checked other cameras downstairs and found no one else. Next, he activated the cameras in the upstairs bedroom. Jo was lying on the bed with 3 boys around her, and they were trying to take off her outfit. She was not moving, and there was no sign of a struggle. He moved softly onto the porch and checked the feed from Donna's room. It was dark. He switched to the camera in Kate's bedroom and saw her lying on the bed. The 3 boys in the room had taken most of her costume off. His heart raced, but he kept his cool. The boys looked athletic, probably football players. Downstairs, 2 more boys waited, while 7 were upstairs. He couldn't hear what they were saying without revealing his location, but the security system had recorded everything. Chris quietly slipped through the kitchen and dining room, keeping to the shadows. The boys were still trying to remove Kate's costume completely, talking about what they planned to do. His focus was clear: protect Kate. As he reached them, he hit one boy with a club and knocked the other out with the butt of his pistol. His goal was to stop them, not to hurt them severely. They collapsed to the floor, and Chris heard Kate groan, knowing she was still conscious. He moved silently toward the stairs. Knowing where the creaky steps were, he avoided them and reached the top undetected. In the hallway, he saw Jo being held by some of the boys, while Donna was already exposed. Without making a sound, he went to Kate's room. Inside, the 3 boys were attacking her. Chris acted swiftly. He knocked the first one down with a punch to the side of his face. Then he struck the second across the bed before he could react. The 3rd boy, who was hurting Kate, didn't stand a chance. Chris hit him in the back of the head and he fell forward. Kate was unconscious, but safe for the moment. Chris made sure she was alive, gently checking her pulse, and whispered a comforting word before moving on. He had handled 5 of them quickly, but his anger was still boiling. His main priority was Jo's safety. He checked the camera feed again and prepared to step in. Joe's costume had been cut off and was on the floor. One man had a knife in his hand and was trying to force her compliance, while two others held her legs. Chris knew he had to act quickly to save her. A phone was set up on the dresser, likely recording the scene. The door swung open and he rushed inside, striking a man in the closet on the cheek with his club. He then swung the other end of a gun, hitting the attacker on the ear. The man screamed, grabbed his ear, and fell to the side. Chris now faced the other two men on the other side of the bed. They noticed the club and the gun. One man held a knife, while the other stepped back, reaching for something near his pants, which were on the floor. "The police are almost here. Drop your weapons and surrender or face the consequences," he said firmly but calmly. He aimed the gun at the man with the knife, who hesitated and let it fall. The other man knelt down and turned, pulling out a small gun aimed at Chris. Chris quickly shot him in the shoulder, causing him to scream and drop his weapon. The man who had fallen grabbed for a gun and raised it. Chris shot him in the shoulder, then quickly pointed his gun back at the man with the knife, who had raised his hands in surrender. "Turn around, keep your hands up, and press yourself against the wall. If you move, I'll take action." The man complied and turned. Chris checked Joe's pulse. It was quick but steady. He opened an app on his phone and contacted security. "Where are the police and EMTs? The girls all have faint but quick pulses. They need help right away. The two I shot do too. 2 vehicles are on the way. They should arrive shortly. I've opened the gate. The other men are still, but the young woman downstairs is starting to wake up. I suggest you stay in your position with the weapons and the men who are conscious. I'll notify you if anyone else moves, and when the police enter. I've informed the dispatcher that you're holding 3 men at the end of the stairs. It's best to call out to the officers when they come in. Tell them you're in the room and that you will put your gun down when they arrive." A few quiet minutes passed, which felt like hours. Then the contact said, "Chris, I'm being told that 4 ambulances have been dispatched and they're looking for others. Thanks. What's your name, by the way?" "I'm Rick. I'll stay on the line until the police arrive. You handled this situation really well. I've recorded everything for you. I can provide a disc to the police so they won't need a warrant." "That sounds good. And thanks for your help tonight. I wasn't sure about all the security measures, but your boss convinced me. It was the best choice I ever made. All right, 2 cars have gone through the gate and are heading to your house. Stay safe." 2 officers were in each car. They quickly came through the door with their weapons ready and spread out. One officer stood over Kate and the attackers, while the others searched the first floor before 3 of them moved toward the stairs. "This is Chris Alexander, the homeowner. I'm watching over 3 men who are troubling the woman in the room at the top of the stairs. There are 3 more men and another woman in the bedroom to the left of the stairs. When you reach here, I will put my weapon down." They climbed the stairs carefully. The first officer kept his weapon on Chris, while the second asked him to set his weapon on the floor. Chris did so slowly to show he meant no harm. They told him to back into the hall, asking him to put his hands behind his back so they could handcuff him while they checked everything. When the first officer entered the room, he noticed a gun aimed at him from behind the bed. He quickly aimed and fired twice, hitting the person with the gun. The pistol dropped to the floor. The other officer left Chris and went into the bedroom. He quickly checked on his partner and then on Joe. He pulled a sheet over her before heading back to Chris. The third officer came from the other bedroom, saying there were 3 men and a woman inside, and they were all unconscious. He used his communication device to report and asked where the EMTs were. Hearing they would be there soon, he urged haste. Chris spoke up. "I'm Chris Alexander, the homeowner. The woman in this room is my girlfriend, Joe Kennedy. My sister Donna is in the other bedroom, and our friend Kate Ellison is downstairs. They all live here. I flew in from Denver earlier tonight. When they didn't return from a Halloween party as planned, I worried. I tried calling, but only got voicemail. I booked an Uber to search for them. As I walked to the gate to meet the driver, 2 cars arrived, so I went back to the house. While walking, I saw the guys pull Joe out of my Jeep and take her inside. They were loudly mentioning what they'd do with her, so I knew she was in trouble. The other guys pulled my sister Donna and Kate from the other car and took them inside. The first group entered the house without turning off the security, so Rick, our contact, called me. I stayed out of sight to make a report and heard my contact tell the 911 operator that it would take about 10 minutes for the police to arrive. Knowing the boys' plan, I realized 10 minutes was too long. I grabbed a club and a gun from the barn. I entered the house and quickly disabled the two men harming Kate. Then I went upstairs. The security cameras showed that Donna was already in trouble, so I entered that room first and handled the three men there without any issues. When I entered Joe's room, I was able to quickly deal with the nearest man using the club. I struck the man on the bed with the gun, and he fell but was still awake. The man at Joe's head, who was trying to hurt her, had a knife. I told him to drop it, and he did. The fourth man reached for a gun on the floor. When he aimed it at me, I shot him in the shoulder. If he had been farther away, I would have aimed for his chest, but being so close, I felt it was better to minimize harm. The man I knocked off the bed picked up the gun and pointed it at me, so I shot him in the shoulder too. He dropped the gun and I waited for the police to arrive. I know the cameras were recording, so my statement is on file. The security footage will confirm everything I've said, and my contact, Rick, is ready to give a copy if needed. I have already allowed the release of the video and audio. Now please let me check on Joe, my sister, and Kate. I am not a danger, and you must see that by now. The three officers looked at each other and nodded, then took off his handcuffs. He rushed into Joe's room to check her pulse and breathing, then did the same for Donna and Kate. Only Kate seemed to be waking up. The other two were still the same. Sirens got louder as police cars filled the area with red and blue lights, and 6 ambulances arrived, taking up all the parking spots. The 3 women and the 2 injured men were examined and taken to the closest emergency room. The remaining 7 men were checked for injuries and tested for concussions. 3 were more seriously hurt. They were handcuffed and taken to the ER in one of the 6 police cars now on the scene, along with a forensic team. Chris had to stay until the lead investigator finished his initial check, so he stepped outside to call his parents and then the Ellisons. It was just after 3 a.m. in Texas and Tennessee, but he felt it was important to keep them informed. They were very worried, but Chris asked an EMT still on site to talk to his parents about the girls. He assured them that their situations were not life-threatening, but they would be carefully checked and tested. Chris's parents told him they would take the first available flight and that the Becks would pick them up. They encouraged him to focus on the girls, and he promised to keep them updated through texts. Next, he called the Ellisons. It was past 1 p.m. in Seattle, but Mrs. Ellison recognized his voice right away. He could hear what sounded like a party in the background. He began to explain the situation. She listened for a moment before asking him to hold on and telling everyone in the room to be quiet. Once it was quieter, she asked him to continue. With a new audience, he started over, sharing only the main points. When he finished, Ed said, "I don't understand why you're in Fort Worth instead of Denver, but I'm thankful you're always in the right place at the right time. We'll be on a plane within the hour, but we will have to fly far south to avoid the storm, so it will take us some time to get there, Chris. Please take care of yourself and the girls until we arrive." The girls had been given a drug, which was added to their drinks while Kate was busy at the bar. One of the boys distracted her while another slipped the drug into their cups. They planned to harm all 3 of them repeatedly. They learned this because the main person responsible, facing serious charges that could keep him in prison for years, told the police everything in exchange for a chance to reduce his charges. When he confessed, 3 others also sought similar deals and shared their stories. From their admissions, it seemed they had a complete picture of what happened. The boys were students from a small college in Oklahoma known for giving troubled athletes a second chance. 8 of them were playing football at this difficult school after being expelled from other colleges for various reasons. Another was a wealthy student who had attended TCU for a semester before leaving school. TCU was the 4th college for John Edward III in 4 years, but he still had freshman status. He had previously tried to win over Kate and Joe and still wanted them. Donna was just an extra presence. As the leader of the group, he had persuaded the others to help him carry out his plan. He provided the drug and added it to their drinks while one of the football players bumped into Kate and then apologized. A group of lawyers arrived to help, but they faced an angry judge, a determined assistant district attorney, and a strong case that included audio and video evidence of what happened at the house. The lawyers tried to dismiss the evidence, but the judge quickly rejected that idea, supporting his decision with references to the law and recent court rulings. Third's lawyers then started a lawsuit against Chris for many reasons. With money from his parents and his job, Chris's lawyers countered by suing John Edward III for various claims and filed many requests to find out everything he had done throughout his life. This time, his father's wealth wasn't going to help him. The prosecution was determined, the judge seemed harsh, and the police had evidence, including videos, recordings, fingerprints, and confessions from others involved. The firm decision that ended the chaos was Trebek's order to review every agreement with Second's business, aiming to cancel as many as they could right away and stop doing business with them. Since Daddy owned a wholesale building supply company that worked closely with Beck, losing this deal could ruin his business. This powerful move halted the strong, not guilty defense, and the lawsuit against Chris was dropped. J.E. Third was released on $500,000 bail, and his father sent him to a rehab center for alcohol and drugs, which also had a program for those who had made serious mistakes. After finishing his program, he accepted a plea deal to get a lighter sentence if he admitted to his wrongs and apologized to the victims. His apology seemed rehearsed but did not convince Chris, who calmly told John Edward III that he would be waiting for him to finish his sentence when he left prison. The anger in his eyes made the third nervous, prompting his guard to chuckle and say, "You know, they don't treat those types well in prison. If he makes it out, he'll see things differently after that experience." Joe and Donna felt lost and tired until Friday evening, but Kate started to feel better that morning. With their parents and the Beck family by their side at the hospital, Chris returned home Friday at 5 to check on the investigation and the situation at his house. The place was still marked off with yellow and black tape, but the investigation had progressed enough that he could go in with police help to get clothes for himself and the 3 girls. He drove back to the hospital in his parents' rental SUV, delivered the clothes, and sat with Joe, who was now awake and smiling. She didn't remember much after they dressed up for the party, and Chris only shared, "You 3 were given something in your drinks and taken to the house by a group of guys from another college. I was there because we had to shut down the work site due to a bad winter storm. I managed to prevent them from doing something to the 3 of you." She knew there was more to the story, but her headache was still bothering her, and she felt drowsy. So she held his hand, told him she loved him, and went back to sleep. Saturday morning, she woke up feeling better and wanting to know why she was in the hospital. Chris was having breakfast with the Beck family, but her parents, along with Kate and his parents, came in to check on her. They explained everything that had happened. She was shocked by what had occurred, especially considering all the safety measures they had in place. She was amazed by her hero, who had managed to calm down 9 men to rescue them. Kate admired Chris just like Joe did, and her parents were also thankful. Chris and the Becks visited Donna, but she was busy with a doctor, so they headed to Joe's room. As soon as Chris entered, Kate and her parents showered him with thanks and praise. Joe had tears in her bright green eyes until Chris broke away to go to her bed. She asked him again, "How many times are you going to save me, Sir Galahad?" "As many as it takes," he answered, kissing her gently. After Donna was cleared by the doctor, she arrived in a wheelchair just in time to hear Joe's question and Chris's response. Ignoring her helper's protests, she jumped out of the chair and hugged both Chris and Joe tightly. "My hero!" That night, they gathered at the Beck home for a catered meal. After dinner, they moved to the large living room where Ed Ellison talked about the surprising events that had led to Kate and Joe being saved and how Chris ended up in Fort Worth to help the 3 girls. Deborah Alexander shared how Chris and Joe first met, while Sandy Beck talked about her mother and stepfamily's attempt to take her away. Ed listened, shaking his head in disbelief. After Deborah finished, he told Chris, "I'm not the most religious person, but there's something more than luck happening here. You are meant to be in these young ladies' lives." Dan Alexander looked proudly at his son, a twinkle in his eyes as he added, "The odds, son, the very unlikely odds. Places like Las Vegas would be amazed by how these events unfolded. It seems like fate is in charge, and fate is something much greater than you. It might be time to embrace it and see where it leads." "And make me a grandmother?" Deborah added excitedly. Joe's eyes widened and her face turned red at Mrs. Alexander's comment. Chris sat up straight, looking serious. Mom, Joe is only 18 and just starting college. She's not thinking about marriage or starting a family yet. Yes, that does seem young. I mean, I was already 19 when your dad married me, she replied. How old were you when you and Trey got married, Sandy? I was 20, but we got engaged when I was 19. Joe, you'll be 19 in December, right? Everyone in the room smiled except for Joe and Chris, who were unsure if this was a joke or something serious. Chris decided to make it light. Back when you were young, people thought you were old if you weren't married by 16. Now most folks wait until they are between 25 and 30 or even older before they tie the knot. And no one has kids before they're 30. Seeing the teasing looks from the women and her roommates, Joe replied, But honey, if we wait until I'm 25, you'll be 32. You'll be too old to help me with the kids. Et tu, Brute, he said with a playful sigh as she nestled closer. My mom wants to see you in a big dress for biology class while trying to find a seat for your baby bump. Then you better hurry, honey. I'm taking that class next semester. He shook his head and turned to his parents. So, Mom, Dad, whatever happened to all that advice about taking my time, building my career, and finding the right person before rushing into marriage? Deborah thought for a moment. Take your time? Well, you're 25 now, so that seems fair. Building your career? I think Trey would agree you've been doing well so far, Deborah added. Oh yes, Deborah, he's certainly on the right track. Once he finishes his master's next July, he'll really be ready for anything, Trey remarked cheerfully, even though he was smiling. All right, so that checks off career. What's next? Ah, yes, finding the right person and getting to know her. Darling, you'll have to speak on that, but from where we stand, you two look like a great match. You're always taking care of her, spend lots of time together, and even when apart, you stay in touch. Well, that's what Donna tells us. Unless, of course, one or both of you want to enjoy being single for a while. Is that what you want? Joe teased Chris and added fuel to the conversation. Not me. What about you, Chris? Are you up in Colorado dating all those pretty girls? I can chime in on that, Trey said. The other students call him the old man and St. Chris because all he does is go to class, work, study, and exercise. He won't even join them for a drink. Chris lowered his eyes with a grin, thinking of a reply when Ed Ellison spoke up. And then there's the question of fate at play. There are so many coincidences. It feels like you two are already meant to be together, doesn't it? And Chris, I was 25 when I married my young bride, who was 18 at the time. What can I say? When you love someone, you know it. I realized it, and I acted fast before someone else took her away. Joe had moved closer to him, snuggling up so much that he could feel her warmth. She looked up at him with a playful smile he adored. Hey, aren't you going to say anything? No, I think I'll just step away from this surprise and find a quiet spot to think. I know when I'm outnumbered. Do you want me to go with you? She asked cheerfully. No, you make it hard for me to think. Just stay here and tell them why an 18-year-old girl who has known someone for less than a year shouldn't marry someone 7 years older. But I don't know why. Maybe you should stay and explain. Donna and Kate had stayed quiet during the surprise for different reasons. Donna, because she was Joe's age and definitely not ready to marry. She had never seen Joe with another man, but many men wanted to be with Joe, and that would be so tempting if it were her. She cared for Joe, but she worried about her brother getting hurt. Kate stayed quiet because she hoped they would break up, giving her a chance with Chris. She would never interfere, but if something did happen. Chris's house was still a mess from the past, but Beck Construction had a few empty apartments for business needs. Chris and Joe took one with 1 bedroom. Kate and her parents took the other with 2. Donna and her parents stayed with the Becks. Joe was her usual affectionate self, but Chris wanted to talk before they went to bed. He thought they should do it at the dining room table. I know the surprise was meant to be fun, and I appreciate it, but you acted like you are ready to settle down or get engaged. Were you just playing around, or were you serious? Both, I guess, Joe replied after a moment. I hadn't even known you until my birthday last December, but now I can't imagine life without you. You've become everything to me. And that doesn't include how you always seem to show up just when I need you. Penchant, huh? Did you learn that in your English class? He joked. No, from my writing class, smart Alec. I could have used liking, but fondness felt more fitting. So, back to the question you've avoided. Are you really thinking about giving up the chance to meet and know other guys, skip being in a sorority or clubs, and miss out on a regular college life? I feel bad even asking that, because my college years shaped who I am. Chris, I can't see myself going out with anyone else. I just can't. I dated a bit in high school, but you are my first real boyfriend, my first serious love, and my only special person. I know I'm not your first, and that's okay. I hope to be your last, though. So, to answer your question, am I ready to trade the college experiences of being single for those of being engaged? Absolutely. Whether we formally call it that or not, I feel like we're already engaged. What about the experiences of a married woman? Definitely. I can still meet new people, grow socially and academically, join clubs and groups, go to games with my husband instead of my boyfriend, and enjoy everything college has to offer. I won't be going to wild parties, getting drunk, or doing anything I don't want to do, and I'm not going to be caught up in things like that anyway. You know how my mother was, and I won't follow in her footsteps, no matter my relationship status. Chris took a deep breath and sighed. Now for the tough question, are you sure your feelings for me are more than just gratitude and loyalty? I've been lucky to be there for you when you needed me, but those feelings aren't the foundation for a long marriage. I can't say I know what makes a long marriage work. I don't have much experience with those kinds of couples. Gratitude and loyalty. Yes, I appreciate all you've done for me, my knight. I'm loyal enough to defend you if anyone speaks badly of you. But do those feelings make me want you? Did they make me fall for you? That seems silly. You said we were made for each other. You love everything about me, how I feel, and the sound of my voice, saying it like I was created to match you. Well, Mr. Alexander, you inspire me in every way. It's like you were made just for me, and you're the first person whose intelligence I admire so much. You take care of me, and I appreciate that, but you also push me. You encourage me to be a better, smarter version of myself, just like you. I'm a simple girl, Chris. I grew up in a tough environment, and my main goal was to make a better life for myself. Once I got out, I discovered that my family was not what I thought, and that real families exist, like yours, the Becks, and Kate's. Most of my experiences with men had been me trying to get away from them, but then I met you. You are the kindest and most caring man I can think of, and you are also very protective, she said with a smile. Are these qualities so common that I should give up on my idea of a perfect man in looks, thoughts, feelings, and spirit just to find someone like you? If we were meant to be together, who are we to change that plan? Chris had a tear on his cheek when he replied. I agree with most of what you said, but I don't think I am as smart as you. I wish I could have recorded your answer so I could listen to it again. The girl I first met and the woman I am with now are two very different people, yet they feel connected. I think you know this, but I fell for you before we even reached Fort Worth. You seemed tough and defensive, but I thought I saw something bright beneath that strength, and it turned out to be amazing. Now, if you mean what you said, we need to talk again tomorrow and maybe go shopping. Come to bed now and I'll show you how serious I am, she replied with a playful grin. The police cleared the area the next day, just as the winter storm returned, bringing more snow and ice to Colorado. There were cold winds and some mixed weather, but it did not cause major travel issues in Fort Worth. Joe and Chris spent the time inside their house, drinking hot chocolate, watching movies, talking, and sharing tender moments. The old house held up well. It wasn't even drafty thanks to the updates they made. Chris thought of many ways to ask Joe the important question in a romantic way, but in the end, he suggested they dress up for a nice dinner and dance in their living room. He wore his best suit, and she wore a lovely blue dress he bought her in Colorado. He opened a bottle of sparkling cider, poured some into the wine glasses he rarely used, and invited her to stand by the fireplace. He raised a glass to her and his love for her, then knelt down and asked the most important question of his life. Joe, the love of my life, will you marry me? Keeping her composure instead of shouting yes was hard, but she managed to reply in a serious tone, Chris, the love of my life, I will marry you, share my life with you, and be your friend and partner. The next 50 years felt promising for Joe and Chris, with hope for even more. It was Sunday and the stores were closed due to the bad weather, but they planned to shop on Monday. Joe soon found the perfect ring. It wasn't the cheapest or the most expensive, but it was just right for her. There were also matching wedding bands for both of them, so Chris decided to buy the whole set. Once the weather cleared up a bit, they invited everyone over for a meal, excited to see how long it would take their guests to notice the diamond ring on Joe's left hand. Chris followed a recipe for carne guisada that Roberto's wife had shared with him. He had never tried it until Roberto offered him one of the tacos filled with it that Maria made. It quickly became one of his favorite dishes. Before moving to Colorado, Chris had gathered almost all the ingredients, except the fresh beef, from the butcher shop. This was his first time trying to make the tasty dish. He also bought a mix to make tortillas, and Joe was busy learning how to prepare them, making sure to take off her ring first. Chris had to call Maria a couple of times for help, but she was patient and understanding with him as he learned. In the end, the carne guisada, frijoles borrachos, and tortillas turned out great. They also prepared a large bowl of salad and had 3 bottles of champagne ready for after dinner. Kate and her parents were the first to arrive. Chris greeted them at the door and told them Joe was upstairs getting ready after all the cooking. He invited them to sit in the living room. Next came the Becks and Alexanders, and Chris shared the same news with them. Donna jokingly asked if she and Kate should go upstairs to get Joe. Chris smiled and said, "No, I think she will be down soon. You know how she loves to make an entrance." The girls glanced at him, puzzled, since Joe usually let others take the spotlight, often sharing it rather than keeping it for herself. Meanwhile, the adults mingled in the living room, enjoying the delicious aromas coming from the kitchen. Chris chatted with Donna and Kate about when they would move back in when they heard a door open upstairs. "Finally!" Donna exclaimed. "The food smells so good, we were about to come get you, Miss Priss." Joe appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing a stylish black sweater dress with red and white trim that Chris had given her last Christmas. Even in her heels, she looked relaxed, with her golden hair framing her beautiful face and wearing just a touch of makeup. She had put in a lot of effort to look nice for this occasion, and had practiced walking down the stairs with her hand resting on the banister. Instead of coming down the usual way, she chose to come down the other side to show off her diamond ring against the dark wood of the banister. As soon as he heard the door open upstairs, Chris quietly stepped back and started recording on his cell phone. He had the security cameras on, but he wanted to capture the moment himself. It was the perfect time for the young girl from Ouachita, and she embraced it well. She came slowly down the stairs, smiling brightly and greeting everyone. Her left hand slid along the banister, the light from the chandelier sparkling on her engagement ring. She was just a few steps from the bottom when Deborah shouted, "Oh my gosh!" and quickly ran to the stairs. Donna and Kate were curious why Joe was dressed so elegantly and acting so grand. Deborah's reaction drew their eyes to Joe's left hand. Donna gasped, and Kate echoed, "Oh my gosh!" as they both rushed to their friend. Joe's smile was radiant as she stopped on the bottom step, holding up her hand for everyone to admire her beautiful ring. Mrs. Ellison and Mrs. Beck soon joined the group, happily examining the ring with everyone, asking when it happened and wanting all the details. The 3 men moved over to congratulate Chris, reminding him how lucky he was to have such a wonderful fiancée. Chris accepted their good wishes, fully aware that he had truly hit the jackpot, all while capturing the special moment on video. He knew Joe would cherish this memory, and he felt pleased that he was thoughtful enough to record it. After the excitement settled down, the men had their turn to look at the ring and offered their best wishes while teasing Chris about spending a lifetime with him. Each man received a gentle kiss on the cheek, which Chris also filmed, before he invited everyone to the kitchen for a buffet-style meal. Chris led the prayer before they got their plates and utensils, moving from salad to beans, flour tortillas, and carne guisada. The table was ready with pitchers of water and tea, while the glasses were filled with ice and hearty slices of tres leches cake for dessert. They received lots of compliments for the delicious food and continued praise for their engagement. It was a happy occasion, with toasts going on as each person shared their feelings about Joe, Chris, and their bright future together. They all left around 10:30, insisting on helping to clean up, wash the dishes, and put everything away. Joe got kisses from the women and hugs from the men as they left, while Chris received kisses from the women and handshakes from the men. They stood on the front porch of their beautifully restored Victorian home, wrapped in each other's arms, waving until the last car drove away. Chris found out that classes would begin again on Thursday, so he had to leave on Wednesday. The parents were also leaving that day, which meant Kate and Donna were moving back in. They were eager to return to their old home, but wanted the newly engaged couple to have some time together. Chris turned off the bedroom cameras and lights downstairs. He picked Joe up in his arms and carried her to their bedroom. They shared sweet kisses and embraced, enjoying their time together, until Joe playfully started to remove his clothes. He tried to help, but she gently pushed his hands away. "Let me go first, my love." Chris smiled and let her take the lead. She unbuttoned his shirt and kissed him softly as she loosened his belt and began to lower his jeans. She knelt to take off his boots and socks, working carefully until he was dressed only in his boxers. He couldn't see much, but when she looked up at him with a mischievous smile, he felt a thrill. With twinkling eyes, she leaned in and gave him a playful kiss, making him feel special and cherished. He couldn't resist. He placed his hands on her head, wanting to bring her closer. She playfully shook her head and said, "No, let me do it my way." He relaxed and watched, enjoying how she skillfully expressed her love. She was busy, her hands exploring as she kissed his sides and stomach, showing her affection in every way. This was not the first time Chris had felt such joy, but seeing his beautiful fiancée looking up at him filled him with warmth. She moved closer, kissing him softly and lovingly. "Joe, you should slow down," he warned, but she smiled and continued, full of energy and joy. Chris felt a rush of emotions, his heart racing and breath quickening. When she finally paused, she looked up at him, her eyes sparkling with mischief, feeling happy in their shared moment. She smiled, looking pleased with herself. "You're going to make a wonderful husband," she said with a playful tone. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, surprised. "I hope it wasn't through practice." "Ever heard of the internet? There's plenty of information if you know where to look," she replied with a grin. A moment of silence passed between them before he leaned forward, lifting her gently until they were face to face. He kissed her passionately, letting their closeness speak for itself. "You're going to be glad you picked up those tips," he teased, placing her gently back on the floor next to the bed. With a soft touch, he helped her out of her dress, folding it carefully and placing it on a chair. He kissed her again, savoring the moment as his hands traced her back. He removed her bra and continued their embrace, enjoying their quiet connection. They shared a moment of tenderness as he held her close, keeping his movements gentle and respectful. The warmth between them was clear, but everything remained soft and simple. He guided her back to the bed where they lay together, enjoying the closeness of the moment. They spent time together, sharing affectionate touches and whispers, savoring each other's company without any need for words. The connection they felt was all that mattered. As the night went on, they remained close, their bond deepening as they embraced the quiet intimacy that only comes from true affection and care. Once the joyful moment passed, she relaxed, pushing his head gently away as she took a deep breath. He lifted his gaze and watched her as her body settled down, listening to her catch her breath. He felt pleased, just as she had a moment before. As she lay comfortably on the bed, arms stretched out and legs relaxed, he playfully asked, "Did you enjoy that, dear?" She let out a soft sound in response, so he leaned closer and affectionately kissed her, which brought her back to the moment. Startled, she scooted back until he held her ankle gently, keeping her close. "Please, not anymore," she pleaded. "I can't take it." He moved onto the bed, supporting her legs, and showered her with kisses that made her squirm. He then shifted his attention to her chest, giving it soft kisses. When she touched his head and moved closer to him, he brought his lips to hers. They kissed passionately for a while. His hands wandered as they found a comfortable position together. He held her close, and she wrapped her legs around him, welcoming him. With each gentle move, she expressed her delight. They found a perfect rhythm together, creating a beautiful moment that brought them both joy. After a while, they laid together, enjoying the peace. Eventually, he rolled over and lay beside her. She cuddled up to him, sighed happily, and drifted off to sleep. He wanted to understand what had made their time together so wonderful, but soon he too fell asleep, the morning sunlight warming him. The light peeked through, prompting Joe to shield her eyes with the sheet. She made soft, sweet sounds in her sleep. He kissed her hair, quietly got out of bed and went to freshen up, feeling a little messy from the night before. After a quick shower, he dried off, put on a robe, and headed down to make coffee. While enjoying his second cup and catching up on news on his tablet, he heard light footsteps on the wooden floor. Looking up, he spotted Joe with her tousled hair, stood, and opened his arms wide. She held up a toy cross, playfully declaring, "Stay back, you silly! I need my coffee and my kitty needs some rest." He chuckled, turned, poured her a cup, adding her favorite sweeteners and cream, and handed it to her, both of them sharing a warm start to the day. She moved back, still holding the cross in front of her, and sat down at the table. He looked at her for a moment before asking, "What's with the cross, my future wife? Do you think I'm a monster or something?" "I think you're quite the danger. No one else could make me feel so wild and lose my words like that." Her tone was sharp, but the smile on her lovely face told a different story. "Ah, sweetie," he said, getting up and walking around the table. "That was just me reacting to that lively girl from last night. Where is she today?" He knelt beside her chair and lightly touched her leg under the robe. "If you touch anywhere I'm sore, I might just spill my coffee on you," she warned, half joking. His hand continued to gently caress her leg while the other slipped around her waist. "Looks like there's still one place we haven't tackled yet. Shall we head upstairs?" he teased. She raised her cup high, hovering it over his head. "That place stays untouched, mister." Then she smiled and added, "At least until our honeymoon." He playfully squeezed her waist, leaning back with a grin. "I'll remember that, sweet cheeks. Now please go back to your side of the table. I need coffee and we have things to discuss," she said firmly. He jumped up, gave her a cheeky look, took her coffee cup and returned with it mixed just right. "So, what's on the agenda?" he asked as he sat back down. "There are 3 things to cover. The first will make you happy. Your lawyer said Elwood and his sons accepted the deal, so we won't have to go to trial. The sons got 7 years and Elwood got 12. They're heading to a prison in southern Texas, which is supposed to be very hot. I just hope they have a tough time in the sun every day. At least they'll be gone for a long stretch. The second bit is a mixed bag, I guess. Our lawyer was really pleased with this news. The 9 guys who tried to hurt us asked for a deal, given the strong evidence against them. The charges were changed to a less severe term because we were not conscious to consent, and they also included some lesser charges for drugging us. They dropped the federal charges in exchange for guilty pleas from all 9. 7 of them received 10-year sentences. John Edward got 12, and the one who shot the officer is facing 20 years in prison. You're right, that really is a mixed bag. 10 years doesn't seem like enough for any of them, especially considering what we know about their past actions. I really think GE3 should face serious consequences for getting the others involved in his plan to harm you and Kate. On another note, JE's future as his father's right-hand man is likely ruined since he will always have to carry the label sex offender. As for the guy with the weapon, that seems about right. He should consider himself lucky I was in a good mood, or things could have turned out much worse for him. Regarding your mom's former boyfriend, I doubt any of them will get their sentences shortened for good behavior. They are likely to struggle in the prison environment here in Texas. In fact, I think they might even get extra time for trouble they cause while inside if they make it through. I heard your mom started her sentence. Did you get to see her after school began? Yes, I visited for 4 straight weeks before they moved her from jail to prison. I've never seen her so focused on anything other than finding drugs like she is on finishing her GED. Sometimes I almost feel hopeful for her, but I won't let myself believe it completely. Maybe after she's been out for a few years and stays clean, maybe. Chris nodded and asked, "What else do you have for me?" She became more serious, but Chris noticed her excitement bubbling to the surface as she began to speak again. "Sandy Beck told me you all have a whole week off before Thanksgiving and no work on the Boulder project from December 20th until January 6th. Okay, and your parents want us to come to Nashville for Thanksgiving. I hope that's fine. I really want to see where you grew up and spend time with your wonderful family." And a whole bunch of other relatives and friends, I assume? He sighed. You do realize this will be your first time meeting my extended family, right? We will have to be ready to handle many repeated questions, along with enthusiastic greetings. Are you really up for that? Not only am I ready, I'm excited. I get to dress up, dress you up, and show you off. Ha! You mean you want to dress up and show yourself off? No one will pay attention to me. I'll get a few quick handshakes from the men and hugs from the women, then they'll crowd around you. She smiled at the thought, stood up and moved around the table to sit on his lap. Please, darling, I promise I'll make it worth your while. If you're trying to persuade me with hints about some special secret you've learned, I'm not sure whether to be happy or worried. Your skills and energy in relationships are already quite strong. I'm older, and I'm not sure how much more I can take. Come on, old man. That's why you leave me feeling worn out after we are together. No. Well, yes, I mean in a romantic way, but also that I'll make you proud. Your country girl is learning manners and how to fit into polite society, thanks to your sister and Kate. We're not going to spend our last day together before I fly back arguing about going to Franklin, not Nashville, for Thanksgiving. If you really want to go and think you're ready to face critical people looking for flaws, I'll support you. Just remember, I warned you. I hope you made plans for Christmas at our place, since we're traveling there for Thanksgiving. She looked down shyly. Yes, your family is coming here on the 23rd and staying until the 26th. After that, we, along with the Becks and Ellisons, are invited to Park City until January 5th. She looked at her fiancé and said, Can we please go? I know there are some hard memories there, but we can create new ones. I love skiing, and I know you do too, since you're so good at it. So, Joe, did you plan any time for us in your busy schedule? I go to school every morning, work hard in the afternoon, and need to exercise a lot in the evenings to manage my energy. I was hoping to relax at home for a week during Thanksgiving and 2 weeks at Christmas. I'll join you because I want to make you happy, but I can't stay until the 5th. I have to be back at work on the 6th, and I want some time at home, so I'm coming back on the 2nd. You can stay and ski if you want, but I'm returning. She felt really bad when he pointed out that she had agreed to give up their time together, but she caught the playful tone in his voice, so she tried to playfully respond. Well, I was just trying to help your feelings a little. You're getting older, and I don't think you can handle a week at home with your future wife, much less two. He lifted her gently and began carrying her toward the stairs. What happened to wanting to give a break? If you think I can't handle a week with you, let's just see how you do in a day with me. She managed, and by the time his flight left Wednesday, she was tired in ways she didn't expect. Dropping him off at the airport, she returned home. As she parked and walked carefully toward the house, her roommates noticed her. You look really worn out, Joe. What did my brother do to you? Donna asked with a grin. Yeah, you're walking like an old lady. What happened? Kate asked. I made a mistake. I told him I agreed to all those holiday activities to spare his feelings. Since he's getting older, I thought he might struggle with just the two of us having a lot of time together. I guess I was wrong about that. Now, could you help me up the stairs and get me some coffee? After that, I need to rest in my bed. I think we need to step up our workouts. If he keeps exercising for 4 hours a day while I only do 1, I won't be able to keep up in the days leading up to Thanksgiving. To be honest, Chris was also very tired, but he didn't have anyone bothering him as he carefully walked to the apartment after getting dropped off by the ride service. The first 3 weeks of November flew by. Chris decided to go to the last 2 home football games for the CU Buffaloes, while Joe attended the final TCU Horned Frogs home game with Donna, Kate, and a few other friends. Joe wore her frayed jeans and team hoodie, getting her share of attention even though she dressed more modestly. She video-called Chris from the game to introduce him to her friends and called him again when she returned home. She knew he was aware there were no other guys at her place because of the security video, which helped keep him reassured about her loyalty. Their video calls made both of them feel secure in their relationship. Neither of them doubted the other, but they appreciated showing their trust. Chris arrived on Friday night before Thanksgiving, and they spent time getting to know each other again until Tuesday, when they had the house all to themselves, as Donna and Kate had gone to their own homes earlier. On Saturday, Chris asked if she needed to go shopping for the celebrations in Tennessee, but she assured him that she and Donna had already used Mom's credit card to get everything ready. With Mom's approval, of course. He wanted a sneak peek of what she had bought, but she just smiled and told him he'd have to wait to see it all. They flew into B&A early Tuesday morning, where Diane picked them up and drove them straight into the cheerful chaos their mom had created in Franklin. Chris got his old room, but Donna and Diane shared a room since the house was packed with family. Many of his other relatives were staying in nearby hotels. His two great aunts, who were like matriarchs for their family sides, were staying in the house. They could be difficult and had strong opinions, but they also knew how to be sweet when happy. Everyone wanted to make them smile. Since all four of his grandparents passed away when he was young, Chris and his sisters thought of their great-aunts as grandparents in their own way. They had their own grandchildren, but they treated their nephew and niece's kids the same. This meant they were willing to give both praise and criticism. When Chris came to a family gathering at a cousin's house with his girlfriend, Becky Arnold, from the University of Tennessee, it was clear that the family was not impressed. In fact, they were quite unfriendly most of the time, except when they sat down to eat. Chris worried about how they would react to Joe when Donna introduced her as Chris's fiancé, Joe Kennedy, and he noticed their frowns. However, Joe and Donna held their own, chatting with the older women. Before long, they were laughing together. Meanwhile, Chris helped his mother around the house but kept an eye on Joe, Donna, Granny Norma, and Grandma Alma. Seeing them getting along eased his worry, and he felt relieved to give them space. Tuesday night was more relaxed, as everyone had to find their own meals unless they were staying overnight. The younger cousins wanted Chris, Donna, and Diane to show them Nashville's music scene, but they decided to wait until Wednesday night when the older family members were busy preparing for Thursday's big meal. On Tuesday night, Joe and Chris were careful to keep things low-key. They enjoyed a close moment together but tried to be quiet. Joe stifled some sounds but noticed that no one mentioned it the next morning, so they hoped they hadn't been overheard. Wednesday was spent with his sisters and two cousins from North Carolina. They visited special places for the family like Dad's office and a storage yard for supplies. They also drove by the church they attended and visited a historic Civil War battleground and museum outside Franklin. Time flew by, and soon it was time to prepare to lead the other 6 cousins who wanted to go listen to music and dance in Nashville. They dressed in Western wear, which was fitting for the night. The 5 men looked great in their jeans, Western shirts, and boots, with all but Chris wearing hats. The women stood out too. All 7 wore denim dresses, from Cousin Renee's short V-neck to Cousin Kathy's longer dress that reached above her boots. Donna, Diane, and Joe wore knee-length dresses with big buttons and matching belts. Chris thought they all looked so good that he wondered if he should have brought along one of his dad's clubs. They stopped by a downtown music venue but were disappointed by the high drink prices and the band's style. Diane then suggested going to the songwriters' round at the Commodore's Grill across the street from Vanderbilt. That was much better. The beer was affordable, the performers were young talents who would likely be on TV one day, and the snacks were tasty. Everyone cheered for all 15 acts, and some cousins had such a good time that they wanted to keep celebrating when the show was over. Donna and Joe were sipping sodas and water, while Chris enjoyed 2 beers before switching to water, and Diane did the same. She and Cousin Kathy were sober, while the others were a bit tipsy, but not overly intoxicated. Diane suggested going to a bar on the way back, and the cousins were eager to go. However, Chris hesitated when he saw the crowd outside and noticed the bar's name. The group was persistent, but he warned them to stay out of trouble due to the bouncer's tough reputation. They waited in line until half of the crowd was let in. Kathy Morris, one of the male cousins, the sisters, and Chris had to hold back for a little longer. They chatted among themselves until Morris got too close to the exit, which upset the bouncer on duty. Morris quickly apologized and stepped back, but the bouncer kept watching him and giving the women sidelong glances. Chris noted how imposing the bouncer was and saw that his friend Donnie was right. The guy was huge. Once they were finally inside, they found the place completely packed. Drinks were hard to find, and the staff seemed overwhelmed and a bit unfriendly. There was a DJ on a small stage, but the atmosphere felt more like a crowded bar than a dance venue. They managed to find a quiet corner to stand together while listening to the music and trying to talk over the noise. Each girl was approached by at least one tipsy person, and Chris had a somewhat awkward encounter when a woman came up to him, leaned on him, and made her intentions clear. He politely turned her down, saying he was engaged, but suggested she approach another guy instead. Joe was dancing with some of the female cousins and didn't notice what happened. Diane, however, did and playfully teased Chris once the woman walked away. Chris was already on edge from the loud music, the jostling crowd, and having to step in when someone wouldn't respect the girls' boundaries. So when a rude guy grabbed Joe and tried to pull her onto the crowded dance floor, Chris's reaction might have been a bit strong. He firmly guided the man away and made it clear he needed to leave. The guy quickly backed off. That was the last straw for Chris. He went around the group, urging everyone to finish their drinks and get ready to leave in 10 minutes, or they'd have to find their own way home. He then gathered the 4 girls and 2 boys who came with him and headed for the door. To his dismay, it was even more packed than before, making it a challenge just to get out of the bar. 2 male cousins, Terry and Morris, were leading the way through a busy crowd, making space for the girls to follow them. Diane and Kathy closely followed the boys, while Donna, Joe, and Chris were behind. Chris got stuck for a moment as 2 busy waiters rushed in front of him with trays of glasses, blocking his path as the crowd pushed in tightly. Chris could see the girls near the door. One girl paused and looked back before suddenly rushing outside, pulling the other girl along with her. Worried that something was wrong, Chris decided to stop being polite and pushed his way through the crowd. It bothered him as a builder to see the poor layout of the place, making it hard to move and possibly dangerous in case of an emergency. He wondered who designed such a cramped space. When Chris finally reached the door, he heard noise coming from the left, towards where their cars were parked. A crowd had gathered, and he couldn't see what was happening, but he could hear some women yelling, "Leave him alone! And stop hurting him!" He pushed his way to the front of the crowd. A large bouncer named Wes was holding Morris down on the ground, gripping his hair tightly. "Give me the phone or I'm going to hurt him more!" A scared Kathy was trying to give the bouncer a phone, pleading with him to stop hurting Morris. Chris stepped forward, grabbing the phone from Kathy's hand just in time. He faced Wes, challenging him. "You want the phone? Get off Morris and come take it from me!" Wes yelled, "I'll hurt him if you don't give it to me." "Go ahead. There are people watching and recording everything. You'll regret it later." Wes heard the word regret and seemed to hesitate. He released Morris and stared at Chris, who held the phone in front of him. Joe shouted angrily, "He pushed Donna and pulled me for no reason. When Morris tried to take his picture to report him, he lost it." "Oh, so you're scared of having your picture taken? Here's the phone. Want to come and get it?" Chris challenged. "Give me the phone or you'll be on the ground with him," Wes yelled as he stood up and stepped over Morris. "The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Do you want it?" Chris taunted back, ready for whatever might happen next. "Come on, you can trust me," Chris said boldly. Everyone outside was now watching the scene on their phones, while the second bouncer rushed through the crowd, shouting at Wes to get back to his post. Wes could hardly believe that someone like Chris would challenge him. "Do you even know who I am? I played for the Titans. I could take you down." "Sure you did. For a short time. I noticed you when we came in. You got on the team only because other players were injured, but as soon as they were better, they let you go. And now, no one wants you. Your football story isn't impressive. If it was, you wouldn't be standing outside a bar bothering people who are smaller than you, right? So, are you going to do something, or are you just all talk?" The other bouncer was getting closer and shouted, "Wes, come back and leave these people alone!" Wes should have heeded the warning, but he didn't. With a wild look, he swung a huge punch at Chris. Instead of backing away, Chris moved in closer and struck him in the throat. Even though Wes was strong, he wasn't ready for the hit. His punch missed as he tried to follow through, and Chris quickly moved to the side. Wes grabbed his throat, turning pale as he struggled to breathe. He turned away, and Chris lightly hit him in the ribs and gave him a gentle shove into a low wall surrounding a tree. Wes hit the wall with his shoulder, yelled in pain, fell to the ground, and rolled to his side, making difficult sounds. The other bouncer stepped closer, alert but calm. He looked at Chris and asked, "Did you handle it?" The question helped ease Chris's anger. He shook his head and replied, "No, but I really should have. Wes has bullied customers here for years, including a friend of mine who ended up in the hospital. You all should have let him go a long time ago. If Morris is as hurt as he looks, you could be dealing with a lawsuit. I get what you're saying, but the owner is friends with his dad. Wes isn't really good at his job or any job, really. He's supposed to stand here and keep fights from happening, but sometimes he takes things too far, and I have to step in. I'd leave if they didn't pay me well, but they do, so I deal with him. Usually he's not like this, but sometimes the situation and the pressure make him act out like he just did. But I won't make excuses for him or for the owner. I saw him hit the kid, and then the crowd pushed in between us. After that, he got up and threw a punch at you. I'll say what you did was to protect yourself, and what he did to the kid was totally uncalled for. By the way, I'm Sam, he said. They shook hands, and he told Chris not to stress. He would talk to the police when they arrived. Chris nodded. Okay, but I'm getting some videos and the names of witnesses. He turned to the crowd and called out, I need videos. If you filmed his attack on my cousin Morris or that guy who hit me, please send it to me. I'll set my phone to receive from anyone for a few minutes. He continued. Also, we need contact details from all witnesses. You just need to let me record your name, address, and phone number. I know no one wants to deal with court, but if we don't stop this guy, he might hurt someone else, and it could be you or someone you care about. In just 2 minutes, he collected more than a dozen videos and had a line of people waiting to share their information. More people arrived as more onlookers gathered to see what was going on. They stepped back when a police car arrived with 2 officers. Sam recognized them and started to chat with them as they approached. He pointed to Morris, who was still on the ground, and Wes, who was lying on his side as he indicated Chris. When Chris saw the officers coming towards him, he handed his phone to Terry and asked him to keep gathering names and contact information from the witnesses. The girls were clustered around Morris, crying and urging him to wake up. But when Diane heard the police asking Chris what had happened, she marched over and told them everything loudly and angrily. The officers took detailed notes and then asked for her contact information. After she finished, Chris realized what had occurred even before stepping outside. He felt proud of Morris for taking a picture, but he was very upset with the bouncer. If he had known the trouble started because Wes was pushing the girls around, he would have made sure Wes faced more serious consequences before he pushed him. It was nearly dawn when they returned home. After giving their statements to the police, they called Morris's parents and then went to the hospital where he had been taken. He stayed in the emergency room for a long time before being moved to critical care with a serious concussion and what the doctor later described as a traumatic brain injury. Morris's parents and brother arrived around 4 a.m. and told the tired group to head home. They slept until late morning and went downstairs to learn about Morris, whose condition remained the same. Chris called his friend Donnie and shared what had happened. He told him that he and the 2 girls involved had filed complaints against Wes, and that Morris would do the same once he woke up. When Chris asked if Morris could join the action against Wes and the nightclub owner, Donnie said his lawyer would reach out on Friday. By the time Thanksgiving dinner was ready, the news had spread among the family and became quite exaggerated. According to the tale, Wes, the bouncer, was a huge figure and all-star linebacker who weighed 400 pounds and stood at least 7 feet tall. He had attacked Morris without warning, but then Chris showed up and confronted him. Chris hit Wes, and he fell to the ground. It was like a battle between David and Goliath, but without the slingshot. Mom was not happy with Chris for getting into yet another fight, especially with someone so big, but she didn't know how he should have acted differently. The grandmothers, on the other hand, admired the girls for helping Morris and praised Chris for stepping in to protect his cousin. Dad just shook his head as the story changed with each telling. Before lunch, he spoke to Chris and said, "You better be careful. You don't want to be the one everyone comes after." Chris reminded him that he didn't start the fight. He only finished it, but he did give Wes a chance to walk away first. "So you didn't provoke him, son. You didn't challenge his skills or say anything to upset him, did you? He could have just walked away. Look, Dad, last year Wes hurt Donnie for no reason. When I saw Morris, I knew he was hurt badly, and if I hadn't stepped in, it would have been worse for him. But if I punched Wes too hard, I'd be in trouble. Wes can lose his temper easily. I've got videos of his behavior on my phone, and I can show them to you and Mom. Maybe then you'll see why I had to do something. Donnie is taking action against Wes in the nightclub, but a lawsuit won't fix his vision or help him deal with the trauma he went through. Morris is dealing with the same problems. This could affect both of them for a long time. I didn't start it, I just stood up to him. He threw a punch first and I had to defend myself. That's all there is to it. And I won't feel guilty about it. He brings this on himself. Even Sam, the other bouncer, agreed. Dad gave Chris a reassuring pat on the shoulder and said, "It's okay, but you don't have to fix every problem. Bullies eventually get what they deserve." And he did, Chris replied as they walked back to the living room. Dan said a prayer over the food, and then they all prayed for Morris to get better and for fairness for the one who hurt him. They also hoped that the person would find their way back to goodness. It was a joyful gathering, but there was a hint of worry that loomed over their family time. Mom focused on the food during the Thanksgiving meal, mentioning who brought each dish and inviting them to take a bow. There were many people sitting around the kitchen and dining room tables, plus extra tables they had set up in the living room. Even with all that food, there was still too much, so Mom made sure each family took home some leftovers. As usual, the family helped with cleaning up, washing and drying the dishes, and putting everything back away. Joe was amazed by the crowd of family members since they arrived. She never knew family could include so many generations, or that they would travel from far away just to catch up and share a meal. At first, she felt a bit shy, but her cheerful nature soon had her mingling with everyone. She shared her story, showed off her ring, answered questions about how she and Chris met, and gently brushed off inquiries about when they would marry. She also asked questions to learn more about each family member. By the time everyone started to leave, she felt fully accepted as part of the Alexander Petty family. The grandmothers were staying for the Saturday evening gathering, where Joe would be introduced to their friends and neighbors. Chris thought she might be nervous, but with the support of his mom, sisters, and grandmothers, she was bubbling with excitement. On Friday morning, they all slept rushing for Black Friday sales. After enjoying a brunch of leftovers, they planned to watch a college football game, visit Morris during his visiting hours, and Chris hoped to take Joe around some of his old favorite places, including his high school. However, everything changed when Donnie's lawyer called. Chris sat with his dad, the phone on speaker, to hear lawyer Mike Ayers' proposal. Chris took notes as Ayers said he would send the details for them to review and to share with Morris and his parents. As soon as the call ended, Dan contacted his cousin at the hospital to say they wanted to speak with them and Morris as soon as possible. They told him to come when they were ready, as Morris was awake and aware, even though he had a bad headache, and could see visitors whenever. The whole family piled into the large SUV for the ride to the hospital. Morris's face looked terrible with cuts from the bricks, swelling and bruising, and one eye was bright red. Chris had seen injuries before, but nothing like this. He noticed the four women seemed to have no idea what serious injuries looked like. It was a hard visit to see, but Morris was excited about the idea of a lawsuit, and his parents were supportive, which made the visit feel a bit better. The ride back home was quiet. Deborah took out the ingredients for sandwiches that she had prepared, and they talked while they ate. Chris saw that Donna, Diane, and their mom seemed preoccupied, while Dan was unusually quiet. When they finished eating, Chris stood to help clean up, but his mother asked him to wait. "We need to talk, all of us. Diane told me that Donna has not been sleeping well and has had nightmares for the last 2 nights since the incident at the club. I worry that seeing Morris like this today will only make things harder. Donna, please share what you told us before." "I wasn't very scared when we faced the bouncer. You were next to me, Joe, and I knew Chris would help soon. But when he jumped on Morris and started hitting him against the bricks, I felt lost. He said he would hurt him if Kathy didn't give back the phone he dropped when Wes pushed him. And I froze. I should have used my training to pull him off, but I felt so small next to him. It really hit me what could have happened to me, especially since I was the first one he pushed. That realization didn't come until I lay down to sleep. He's clearly unstable enough to hurt anyone, even girls. When I tried to sleep, the memories rushed back, mixing with my thoughts from that Halloween night. Maybe it was just too much happening too close together, or perhaps I don't know why, but suddenly I feel uneasy, powerless, and scared. I don't know why it took so long. I know I was affected by those other people, and I felt awkward going through all the tests at the hospital and answering police questions. I should have reacted sooner, but everyone was so kind and supportive. I didn't remember anything after dancing at the party. Plus, it happened to all three of us, so I felt my friends understood how I was feeling. Joe, Kate, and I talked about it a few times between Halloween and Thanksgiving. It really didn't feel so bad when we first talked about it. We decided it was better to forget what happened since we were rescued before anything terrible occurred, and we couldn't remember much. I thought I'd moved on until that bouncer hurt Morris badly, threatened us, and went after Chris. Now I feel even worse than when I woke up in the hospital. Joe, you've been through so much. How can you be so brave? Joe took a moment to think before replying. I'm not brave, Donna. I went through days of feeling bad about myself after what happened in Park City. I kept wondering if I did something to encourage those men or why they wanted to harm me. Then Chris and I talked about it. I told him I felt it was because they saw me as someone they could take advantage of. He reminded me that Kate was also in danger, that they planned to hurt her too, and she comes from a good family. It showed me that it wasn't about where you come from. He said we are beautiful young women, and sadly, some people will always be drawn to that, so we have to be careful. We did everything right at the Halloween party. Even a police officer told me we did. We didn't do anything wrong at that bar in Nashville either. Those boys at Halloween were just bullies like that bouncer. I'm not saying I don't have some bad memories from all this, because I do. But if you've done your best and bad things still happen, all you can do is live with it and think about what you can do better next time. Maybe my childhood has taught me to accept what I can't change. My coach always said, don't let one mistake lead to another. Everybody makes mistakes. You have to move forward and focus on what's next. Don't dwell on the past. Joe smiled, reminiscing. She had other sayings that fit this too, like, when the situation gets tough, the tough keep going. What happened to me at Halloween was scary and upsetting, not trying to diminish that or what happened with the bouncer, but nothing compared to being in my bed while Elwood had a house full of loud and rowdy men, hearing footsteps heading down the hall toward my room. I always locked my door, but I knew it could be broken down easily. Many nights I would sit on my bed with my phone ready to call for help, shouting at whoever was knocking to go away, or I would call for help. With Chris, school, and my friends, I think I manage my bad memories pretty well when I'm awake, but I still have nightmares sometimes. You can't control what you dream about. Deborah then spoke. Joe, after Donna talked to me, I called Stephanie Ellison to ask if Kate is also having problems. Stephanie said yes. She was scared to go out at night and had bad dreams when she slept. So she made plans to see a counselor in Fort Worth who helps women affected by violence. We'll also have Donna work with her. What about you? Would you be interested? Joe looked at Chris, who only shrugged. After thinking for a moment, she replied, Yes, I would if they accept my insurance. I can't afford much, and I don't want anyone else to pay for me. She does take insurance, and I'm sure yours will cover the sessions. After what you just shared, I think talking to someone could be good for you, especially beyond your recent troubles. You have faced many tough times in your life, and I admire how you have handled it all. When Chris first mentioned you, he said you are very strong and sensible considering everything you've been through, and I can see that's true. Still, talking to a professional might help you move past these things so you can focus on your future. The party planner and a loud team arrived early Saturday morning, making it hard to sleep in. 2 large trucks pulled in behind them with tents, chairs, and tables for the outdoor party, and a crew began setting them up. The women were set for a spa day starting at 11, which included the grandmothers and a few cousins, too. Women love any reason to dress up, show off their best jewelry, and celebrate, Dan told his son as the women left in a happy group. Your mom has been so excited since Joe accepted your proposal. What could be more thrilling for her than introducing her son's fiancé to everyone? She is thrilled to have Joe as her future daughter-in-law, especially since she likes to say Joe never even had a debut, as she put it, sounding very serious. All we need to do is stay out of the way, dress nicely, and let the women shine. They are the ones in the spotlight. I think we can even relax with a drink or two before it all starts. The men really only needed to shower, shave, and put on their best suits, so they watched football and took it easy. They were supposed to help with the setup, but Dan said that's why he hired someone to plan the party, so they enjoyed themselves and checked on the progress outside only now and then. The party planner did come over for help with table arrangements, but Dan said to ask Deborah instead, as he didn't want to take the blame for putting anything in the wrong spot. They went back to the games, and she called Deborah. The women returned a couple of hours before the event started, but they quickly went to their rooms without saying anything to the men. An hour later, Chris and Dan went upstairs to wash up and get dressed. Since the women were gathered in Deborah's room, Dan was told to go to the guest room where his clothes were ready. Donna and Diane's dates, Anthony and David, were watching the beginning of the Tennessee versus Missouri game with Chris and Dan when the women started to come down the stairs in a line, led by the grandmothers, followed by Deborah, Diane, Donna, and Joe. The grandmothers looked elegant in their champagne and beige dresses that reached their ankles. The three Alexander women dazzled in their outfits, a gold midi dress, a sequined blue midi dress with a side slit, and a red mini dress. In a nod to tradition, Joe wore white, but it wasn't a long gown. Her off-the-shoulder dress had a daring split in the front, giving a hint of her legs as she walked. Her golden hair was styled in loose curls, framing her pretty face and neck, which was adorned with a pearl necklace. A white wrap draped over her shoulders. The girl from Ouachita looked like a fancy debutante, and Chris couldn't help but smile as he thought, if she looks this good in a dress, how amazing will she look in a wedding gown? Deborah noticed his smile and felt pleased. That was exactly the reaction she hoped for when she chose the dress for Joe. In her mind, there was no better time to start thinking about a wedding. Getting engaged was just the first step, and they hadn't yet discussed a date, other than a vague someday in the future. Dan led his beautiful wife down the brick walkway that split the two party tents. The band finished their song the moment they saw the grandmothers step onto the path and began playing the classic tune, When It's Iris Time in Tennessee. As they neared the tent and applause grew louder, Diane and David stepped out, followed by Donna and Tony a moment later. The applause continued until all six were gathered on the concrete pad at the end of the sidewalk, looking back at the house. Chris glanced at Joe. If she felt nervous, she didn't show it at all. She walked confidently, her head held high, as if she had been making grand appearances at fancy parties all her life. Chris kissed her forehead, and she smiled up at him. He asked, "Ready?" Joe sent him an air kiss, said, "I love you. Let's do this," and linked her arm through his. They stepped through the door into silence, and soon the lively sounds of Rocky Top filled the night air. With warm smiles, Chris and Joe walked down the path to applause and excited chatter as people praised Joe's dress and her stunning beauty. When they got to the front, Deborah gave Joe a quick hug, then Chris took her hand and led her to the stage. Joe wasn't the only one surprised. The rest of the family was shocked too. This was not what Deborah and the girls had planned. The leader of the quartet handed Chris the microphone with a friendly smile. He turned to Joe and announced, "May I have your attention, please? Thank you. On behalf of my family, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. It shows how fortunate we are to have such wonderful friends. Next to me is my fiancée, Amy Jo Kennedy, but she likes to be called Joe. I met Joe in a cafe in Hot Springs, Arkansas last December, and we traveled together to Fort Worth, where she's a scholarship student at TCU. We started as friends on that trip, and over the holidays, our friendship turned into something more. It's funny because Johnny Duncan and Janie Fricke predicted this long before either of us was born. I like to think our friendship began when I persuaded her to sing a duet with me, even though she wasn't too impressed with my singing." When the laughter quieted down, he added, "Now, without further ado, here is Joe and the Cowboy." Joe looked surprised, but Chris squeezed her hand and encouraged her. "Come on. Everyone already thinks you look wonderful. Let them hear you sing." A guitar started playing softly, and Chris began, "Life can be great on the road when you're driving through Arkansas. I won't forget the day I met the girl from the Ouachita." Joe quickly joined in for the chorus, and then sang her part with a beautiful voice. "Wild like a rushing river, Joe holds my heart so dear, sweet country girl, I'd give anything to call you mine for real." She said, "Thanks for stopping. My name is Joe. You look like a cowboy to me. I see by the plates on your old truck that you're from Tennessee, and you're a good-looking cowboy, probably the best I've ever seen." I replied, "You're not bad for a country girl in those faded jeans." They sang the rest of the song together, and when they finished, the applause and cheers from their family were loud and heartfelt. They embraced each other, shared a quick kiss, and smiled at the crowd. Chris then added, As Joe pointed out earlier, I was driving a pickup, not an old car. She wasn't hitchhiking, and she definitely wasn't impressed by my looks. And just so you know, she wouldn't let me stop for a drink because she's not old enough. Once the laughter settled, Chris became more serious. He looked down at his beloved and addressed the crowd. Actually, our story is quite different from the song we have. Still, I realized that some parts were true that night and are true tonight. When I helped her into the truck, I saw beauty in her faded jeans. She is from the Washita, and life feels amazing as we travel mile after mile through the night, listening to old country music with Joe. I understood then that something wonderful was happening in my life. Even though she's not as wild as a raging river, Joe holds my heart, and she has since that special night. I am the luckiest man in the world that a higher power brought us together that night. I am grateful for her love and that she accepted my marriage proposal. I hope to share some words with all of you tonight, but first, may I have this dance, my love? The quartet played Joe and the cowboy again, and they danced. It wasn't their wedding dance, but they gazed into each other's eyes as if it were, and no one else joined them. They turned and bowed to the crowd, then Chris nodded to the quartet, which began to play Tango of Love. Joe's eyes sparkled, and they impressed everyone there with their dancing skills and timing. They spent time with everyone, stayed until the end, and wished each departing guest a good night. Chris felt tired, but Joe was filled with joy, as was Deborah. Sweetheart, I knew you would shine, but you truly charmed everyone here. They talked about the night, reliving the moments for almost an hour until Chris stood, gently took Joe's arm, and said, I'm feeling tired, Joe. Let's go change and get some rest. His mother laughed. If you're so tired, I guess I won't hear any noises from your room tonight. Chris and Joe blushed, said goodnight, and happily walked up the stairs. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.